Good morning. Welcome to Monmouth University and beautiful Woodrow Wilson Hall. My name is Peter Reinhardt. I am a professor here at Monmouth University and the director of the Kislak Real Estate Institute and the chairman of New Jersey Future. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's important program on rebuilding a resilient New Jersey shore. I want to thank New Jersey Future, the Regional Plan Association, the Community Foundation of New Jersey, the Climatological Institute housed at Rutgers, the Monmouth University Urban Coast Institute, the Monmouth University Polling Institute, and our other partners listed in the program for their support and enabling us to put together this important event on very short notice. Before we begin, we are reminded that today, December 7th, is Pearl Harbor Day. So let's just take a moment and remember and thank those veterans who have sacrificed and continue to sacrifice to protect and defend our country. Thank you. A few housekeeping items. Please turn off your cell phones. I just did mine. And because we are a big group and we will be covering much ground today, we will not be taking any formal breaks during the program. If you need to get up, please do so as you need. The restrooms are located down the stairs on the lower level. Men to the left, women to the right. There are no political implications of those locations. There was a survey form on your seat when you arrived. Please hold onto this until the end of the conference when Patrick Murray, the director of the Monmouth Polling Institute at Monmouth University, describes the work they are doing to document the public impact of the storm and policy preferences going forward, and giving each of you a chance to complete the survey so that we can compare these results to their statewide efforts. Time permitting, we will be able to ask the speakers some audience-generated questions, and to speed this process, we have provided note cards at registration. So if you have a question, please put your question on the note card and hand it to one of the volunteers at the table or standing along the sides. As you can see, this program has generated an enormous amount of interest, and we had to close registration to the conference earlier this week. So to accommodate those who were not able to attend in person, the event is being live streamed. For everyone else, the event is being recorded and will be available in the near future as a link at the New Jersey Future website and the Monmouth University Urban Coast Institute website. New Jersey Future is live blogging the event via Twitter with the hashtag #ResilientShore. So please feel free to add your own tweets using that hashtag, and using the Tweet Chat website, we'll insert the hashtag automatically. New Jersey Future will be compiling some of the live tweets onto its website in the days to come as it provides summaries of what we cover here this morning, and you'll receive an email next week, if you've given us your email address, with links to these and to the recording of the event. We have over 400 people registered for this program, truly a testament to the tremendous interest in recovering quickly from Hurricane Sandy. We are pleased to have in the audience some notable New Jerseyans. Former Governor Jim Florio is with us, and we're honored by his presence. Governor. The true host of the event, President Paul Gaffney of Monmouth University, is here. And we also have some state and local officials. We have Grace Hanlon, the Director of Tourism for the state of New Jersey, Jerry Scharfenberger, the Director of the Office of Planning Advocacy for the state of New Jersey, Mayor Jerry Tarantolo from our neighboring town of Eatontown, and I'm sure there are others, and if I've omitted you, my apologies. So let's begin the program. There are moments and events in our lifetimes where we vividly recall where we were and what we were doing, and the days leading up to and following October 29, 2012, when Hurricane Sandy, the superstorm, ravaged New Jersey, will be one of those events that people who experienced it will remember for many years to come. There are people who lost their lives, people who lost their homes, people who lost their businesses, people who lost their possessions, their family heirlooms, their memories, people whose lives have been changed forever. At Monmouth University, we hosted over 1,000 evacuees for over a week in our multi-purpose athletic center. Hurricane Sandy left behind shattered lives and piles of rubble and debris and mountains of sand in the streets and buildings. It's natural to want to recover and rebuild what we had before. The Jersey Shore is famous for its homes, its businesses, its boardwalks, its beaches, its lifestyle. Millions of people have memories of their summers at the Jersey Shore. So how do we recover from this destruction and move forward with a smarter, more resilient New Jersey that will be better able to withstand another Sandy? What preparations or changes should we make in anticipation of the next major storm? Will there be frequent Sandys, or was that the once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime storm from New Jersey, or is it the new normal? Will there be Sandys every few years? Is the sea level going to continue to rise? Will it rise more rapidly, less rapidly? We will obviously know the answers only in hindsight. But what should we be planning for in the future? What are some lessons we can learn from other areas hard hit by hurricanes like New Orleans and the Gulf Coast? Today's program is designed to bring together some experts in the fields of climatology, beaches, flood protection, architecture, housing, the environment, insurance, planning, to provide some insight and guidance for the New Jersey residents, business owners, and community leaders who will be making these decisions in the near and midterm future on what to build, where to build, or where not to build, and how to build. We know of the desire to rebuild quickly, to get back to normal, and for those businesses dependent on the summer tourism season to be ready for the summer of 2013. But we should also do so in a way that takes account of doing things better and smarter to avoid or limit damage that can be avoided by building where and in ways that minimizes the potential for significant damage from another major storm. Our program consists of 4 panels, each focusing on a different aspect. Following each panel's presentations, there will be a short question and answer period, time permitting, and we ask that you write down your questions, as I said earlier, on the note card you were given at registration and give them to the collectors. So let's begin with our first panel. The panel will be moderated by Jean Herb. Jean is the Research Program Administrator at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. Before joining Rutgers, Jean was the Assistant Commissioner at the New Jersey DEP for Policy, Planning, and Science. Jean Herb.
Good morning. I am so pleased to be here today and so very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce these 2 wonderful speakers. Just by way of background, part of the reason that I'm here today is one of the roles that I play at the Blaustein School is in conjunction with my colleague, Dr. Marjorie Kaplan from the School of Science and Biological Sciences, Environmental and Biological Sciences. We facilitate a group called the New Jersey Climate Adaptation Alliance. The Alliance emerged about a year ago when we had a kickoff conference at Rutgers to look at long-term climate impacts in New Jersey. Our focus has been on 6 sectors, coastal communities being one of them, water resources, the built infrastructure, including telecommunications and energy infrastructure, public health, natural resources, and agriculture. The concept of the Alliance is a group of participating organizations and individuals who are looking to see how we can best enhance climate preparedness in New Jersey for what you'll hear about today as the new normal. We are humbled to have former governors Florio and Kane serve as our honorary chairman, and Senior VP from PSE&G, Ann Hoskins, is our chair. A number of our advisory committee members are here today. Megan is on our advisory committee. Some are speaking on the panel. Others include Tim Dillingham, Mark Moriello, Rob Freudenberg, and Gary Sondermeyer are in the room. I think Ann Hoskins is going to be here today. Where we're currently proceeding is that we have a 4-point work plan, one of which is to look at public policy recommendations to enhance preparedness in New Jersey. Another is to work with the business community. Third is to undertake demonstration and pilot projects to be able to illustrate the benefits of climate preparedness and resilience. And fourth is to undertake communications and outreach efforts to key decision makers. We're pleased to announce actually today that we've just been notified that we've received a substantial grant from the Kresge Foundation to undertake, starting right after the holidays, a major deliberative effort to develop a compilation of public policy recommendations in those 6 sector areas. So we'll be working with a variety of partners, including folks like Tony McDonald from the Urban Coast Institute, including folks like the New Jersey Association of City and County Health Officials and others, the American Planning Association, to look at what is the right mix of public policies at the state and local level that are needed to prepare New Jersey for climate, for the new normal. That effort will involve informing a stakeholder process through current science, and it will involve undertaking a series of workshops to develop a set of, hopefully, consensus recommendations. We welcome participation that's intended to be a fully integrated process, and so we are sort of coming out of the gate today. We'll be issuing a press release today or Monday about this new effort. A couple other things that will be coming up on our agenda is we're also kicking off some meetings with the business community to look at vulnerability in the private sector. So we'll be sitting next week actually with some business leaders to talk through how do we develop vulnerability assessments for key business sectors here in New Jersey. At the back of the room, you'll see a save the date for our statewide conference, which is May 22nd at Rutgers. That save the date also has our website where you can sign up and become join our email list, where you'll be able to get notified about the conference and about our process for developing public policy recommendations, and where you can just even reach out to us to let us know how you want to be involved. We know that later on today, folks from Monmouth will be walking you through a poll that they've recently undertaken, and my understanding is that the folks here at Monmouth are collaborating with folks at the polling center at Rutgers, and we'll be undertaking a poll in January, and that effort will be a collaborative effort between the 2 schools so that we can have yet another data point a little bit farther out after the storm. Our poll will be a little bit broader too, not just to look at issues regarding coastal rebuild, but also looking at the public's perceptions of risk associated with climate, and also looking at broader issues in terms of the public's willingness to pay for resilience. So keep an eye out for that. On Monday or Tuesday, we will be loading up on our website a series of working briefs that provide pretty thorough data in terms of anticipated impacts of climate in New Jersey. So again, if you want to grab that save the date paper, you'll see how to sign up for the website, and you'll be notified when those materials are coming up. With one last thing, I guess, is I have a longstanding personal commitment, and which was scheduled a year ago with my family, so I'm going to be sliding out at the end of the morning session. So my colleague, Matt Campo, where are you, Matt? Is here. Oh, there he is, waving. So Matt will be here through the day, so if you have questions, you can certainly reach out to Matt, but also, again, you can grab me at some point in the morning. I'll try to linger in the back, and you can grab our flyer, and you'll be able to reach us through that. So thanks for letting me giving you that update on our work. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tony Broccoli. Tony is, besides being one of the nicest people I've ever met, he has been tremendous advisor to our work at the New Jersey Climate Adaptation Alliance. He's always the person who sort of keeps us to the highest integrity in terms of sticking to the science. He's a professor of atmospheric science at the Department of Environmental Science at Rutgers, and he also serves as the director of the Climate Environmental Change Initiative at Rutgers, which is an effort to integrate climate work throughout the university, both in terms of social, environmental, and other sciences. So.
Thanks very much, Jean, and I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to speak this morning about a topic that is very important to me, and to thank you to do it in such a very nice venue. So we know that there is a new normal as a result of the events of October 29th and what have followed. Certainly in the sense of how people respond to the changes in their environment, how their lives have been affected by Sandy, we can be sure that there is a new normal in that regard. My task today is to try to discuss the natural science aspects of this problem with regard to climate, with regard to weather. Is there a new normal? And certainly we experienced something very, very unusual on October 29th. All we have to do is look at the changes that have taken place on our shoreline. Here in Mantoloking on the left, where the after of this before and after picture already shows the efforts of the Army Corps to close off the inlet that had opened up near the Mantoloking Bridge. But also, we have to keep in mind that a lot of people were really seriously affected by this storm. These homes in Ortley Beach that were destroyed. We've seen scenes like this before in other places at other times. Having them happen so close to home makes it much more intense, a personal experience. But there are still important science questions to consider when we think about the implications of Sandy, and I'll try to address some of those questions today. In the aftermath of Sandy, there were some very prominent statements made by public officials about the implications for the future. Governor Cuomo said extreme weather is the new normal. In the past 2 years, we've had 2 storms, each with the odds of a 100-year occurrence. Mayor Bloomberg, our climate is changing. And while the increase in extreme weather we have experienced in New York City and around the world may or may not be the result of it, the risk that it might be, given this week's devastation, should compel all elected leaders to take immediate action. So what does the science say about climate change and its implications for extreme events like Sandy? I'm going to try to address 4 questions that are relevant to that today. What do we mean by normal climate? We can't think about a new normal unless we really ask ourselves, what do we mean by normal? Is there a new normal? Of course, I've just said there is in many respects, but in terms of weather and climate, in terms of the potential changes in the frequency of events like Sandy, what can we say about that? If there is a new normal, were Sandy and some of the other recent extreme events that we've had in this area harbingers of future events? And how can we prepare for future weather and climate impacts in terms of being able to anticipate them better? So, the first question, what do we mean by normal climate? In climatology, we use the term normal to describe the expected range of conditions. Now, very often when you watch the weather forecast on television, normal will be presented as the normal high temperature for today is 47 degrees. And that's a little misleading because that's the long-term average temperature. But when we think about the normal climate, we also have to think about extremes as well as averages. It's the range of conditions that we can experience at a specific location. And this definition of normal arises from the concept of stationarity. This is a statistical term, but in the words of Chris Milley, a USGS hydrologist, stationarity is the assumption that the future will be similar to the past in a statistical sense. And if we have a stationary climate, then the weather events that we could expect in the future would be drawn from an underlying range of past occurrences, a probability density function to be statistical about it. And if we had good enough observations and they stretched far enough back in time, we could use those observations to determine the odds of getting certain events. And this is the idea behind identifying something as a 100-year storm. That's looking at what's happened in the past and saying this is an event that has a 1 in 100 probability of occurrence in any given year. So when we think about climate and we think about a stationary climate, then the past is the key to the future. But is there a new normal? Does the past provide enough knowledge for us to know what to expect in the future? Well, when Chris Milley was writing about stationarity, here was the title of his paper: Stationarity is Dead. A later paper in Science made the case more clearly. Climate change undermines a basic assumption that we have historically used to assess risk. With climate change, we no longer expect the future to look like the past. We know the basics of climate change. Combustion of fossil fuels is emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Emissions measured in units of tons of carbon have just passed the 9 billion mark and continue to increase. In fact, are increasing now more rapidly than had been anticipated as recently as a decade or two ago. Slightly less than half of this carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere. Most of the remainder goes into the ocean. There it can cause ocean acidification. That's a different topic, but the impact on climate is the one that we're focusing on today. Carbon dioxide heats the Earth. We know the global temperatures have risen between about 1 degree and 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit during the past century. And those increases in temperature also cause other changes in climate, and they cause changes in sea level. And of course, both of these are going to be very important to what I'm talking about today. Climate change does alter the probability of extreme events. Some kinds of extreme events, we can demonstrate this already. This figure is from a paper by Jim Hansen of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, and it is a diagram showing the probability of summer temperature over all of the grid boxes in the northern hemisphere that he analyzed. And there are a bunch of colored lines there on the right. The units on the horizontal axis are standard deviations relative to a 1951 through 1980 baseline. And if you look at the colored curve labeled 1951 through 1961, it looks pretty much like that bell-shaped curve we learn about in statistics. It's centered at 0 because that's how the mean and standard deviation were defined, and it has a fairly nice symmetric shape. But if you look at the next set of curves, the yellow one from the 60s into the early 70s, and then green, 1971 through 1981, as we go forward in time, we see this curve shifting to the right, with the last decade, 2001 to 2011, being the magenta curve. The mean has now shifted by about 1 standard deviation. But more importantly, where do extremes occur? They occur in the tails of the distribution. And we're now seeing events in terms of summer temperature, heat waves, if you will, occurring much more frequently than they did in the past. Some events, like the European heat wave of 2003, the Russian heat wave of 2010, the heat wave in Texas and Oklahoma in 2011, that are records, are extents that we've never seen before in terms of the magnitude and the area covered. So we know that climate change does alter the probability of extreme events. We've seen that here in New Jersey. This is what the time series of New Jersey summer temperature looks like. There are ups and downs from year to year. That's weather. New Jersey is a small area. Climate change doesn't mean that we won't have natural variations due to differences in the atmospheric circulation from one year to the next. But it's very clear that a majority of the warmest summers have happened in the last decade or two. And the kind of very cool summers that we saw in the early part of this record, the 1900s, the 19-teens, the 1920s, we haven't seen summers that cool recently. So what Jim Hansen can tell us statistically, looking at a larger sample for the whole Northern Hemisphere, we are seeing here in New Jersey as well. But what about events like Sandy? And Sandy is not the only extreme event that we've had. Until Sandy, there were many other events that got our attention that caused power outages and other interruptions in services and infrastructure throughout New Jersey. A little less than, I guess, 2 years ago, a snowstorm began on the day after Christmas and dumped as much as 2 to 3 feet of snow on the area. What was unusual about the Boxing Day snowstorm is that some of the heaviest snowfall totals were in the urban corridor in northeastern New Jersey and down along the Jersey Shore. This is, of course, quite different from most storms where the heaviest amounts are inland with smaller amounts towards the shore. Tremendous impacts from this event. Many of them have been forgotten because of what's happened in the meantime, but several days of disruptions that maybe were minimized a little bit because it was the holidays and many people weren't working. Of course, Hurricane Irene in August of 2011 topped off what became by far the wettest month in the history of New Jersey. Irene took a fairly typical track for a hurricane or tropical cyclone. As we'll see later, Sandy was a little bit different from that. One of the big impacts of Irene was flooding. 6 to 8 inch rainfall totals were common at the end of a very wet month, and many parts of the state, especially the flood-prone Passaic and Raritan River basins, experienced record or near record flooding. Then, only a couple of months later, we had the unusual early season snowstorm in late October. Snowfall amounts as much as 16 inches in northern New Jersey, heavy snowfall throughout the Northeast. And when I say heavy, I mean heavy. Removing it from my driveway was like shoveling wet cement. And that heavy snow, coupled with trees that were still in leaf, brought down power lines and caused power outages that in many cases lasted for more than a week. And then it was early in the summer, late June, that we had the derecho event, a cluster of severe thunderstorms that marched across the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic states that caused power outages for millions of people, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, but also including southern New Jersey, wind gusts of 80 and 90 miles an hour, and sadly, a number of deaths, including here in New Jersey. But Sandy has certainly set the bar in terms of widespread impact for this area. Sandy was an unusual tropical cyclone. It took a very unusual path. It became a hybrid storm as it fell under the influence of the mid-latitude weather systems that generally produce nor'easters. On the right, these are the tracks of all previous tropical cyclones that passed within 50 miles of Atlantic City. Some of them were weak storms, some of them were stronger storms, but what's evident from looking at those tracks is that none of them looked like Sandy. In fact, if Sandy had happened 50 years ago, we would have had no idea what to expect. Instead, because of the technology for forecasting the weather, which gave us a warning of as much of a week that something like this could happen, we were able to anticipate that sharp left turn that Sandy took just before it struck the coast of New Jersey. Here is a meteorologist's version of the TV weather map as Sandy was making landfall. And the take-home message from this slide is how large the circulation of Sandy was. And this was because it was a hybrid of a tropical cyclone and the kind of mid-latitude storm that we typically get in the winter months. That meant that the effects were spread out over a very large area. It also meant that the strong winds of the storm were acting on a very large area of the ocean surface, making the storm surge larger than it might have been for a storm of similar intensity but not as great extent. This is the tide gauge record from the Battery in Lower Manhattan. 3 curves here. The red curve is what was actually measured by the tide gauge, so water levels approaching 14 feet above mean lower low water at the peak of the storm. The blue curve is what would have been expected just from the astronomical tides, so 2 peaks and 2 troughs each day with about a range of 4 feet. That's typical for tides in this area, maybe a little bit more along the open ocean. The green curve is the difference between the red curve and the blue curve, and that's the effect of the storm surge. So the storm surge reached levels of about 9.5 feet in the Battery. And the coincidence of that maximum storm surge with high tide was responsible for the extremely high water levels. Now, as I mentioned, this was very well forecast. This is a screenshot from the Weather Channel's website showing those purple areas, Raritan Bay, New York Harbor, Long Island Sound, forecasted storm surge of 6 to 11 feet. So this event was very well forecast. And of course, it had tremendous impacts, as evidenced in this picture of water streaming into the Battery Tunnel in New York City. Winds were also very high, so when we talk about the kind of power outages that have been experienced throughout the area, the strong winds were largely responsible for that. All of the places with the red boxes here experienced wind gusts above hurricane force, the highest of which 96 miles an hour at the Eaton's Neck Coast Guard Station on the north shore of Long Island, but widespread wind gusts above hurricane force, and at other places, the yellow boxes above tropical storm force. What does the science tell us about these kinds of extreme events? Well, we don't know yet if tropical cyclone activity has changed systematically over the course of our records. This is partly because we're much better at observing hurricanes today. We have satellites, we have radar, we have tools for detecting storms that didn't exist as recently as the 1950s. So that makes it difficult to know if there has been a systematic trend. In the future, the best evidence we have now is that tropical cyclones will probably increase in strength, but not necessarily in number. In fact, there's some evidence that there could be a decrease in the number of storms globally, but the certainty here is not that great. This is an area that still needs more research. When it comes to events like the derecho event, we don't know if severe thunderstorms and tornadoes have become more frequent for the same reasons. Observational methods have improved greatly. If someone sees a tornado today, a video is sent to the news media or to scientists very, very quickly. That wasn't true in the past. Again, future trends are uncertain. And I'll say a little bit more about how we're going to address this scientifically at the very end of my talk. But we do know that many areas have experienced upward trends in the number of heavy precipitation events like we had from Irene last year, and it is likely that such trends will continue throughout the 21st century. This is mainly because a warmer atmosphere has more water vapor in it, and so that when we do get precipitation, the precipitation will be heavier. And as I showed you before, record high temperatures and heat waves have been occurring more frequently, and they are expected to increase further during the 21st century. But perhaps most relevant to our discussion today is that the ongoing rise in sea level has raised the baseline for coastal flooding from storm surge, and the rate of sea level rise will likely accelerate during the remainder of the 21st century. This is the sea level record for Atlantic City. That's the station on the New Jersey coast where we have the longest record, just about 100 years at this point. Sea level has been rising at a rate of roughly 4 millimeters per year. That's 16 inches in the past 100 years. Some of that rise, a little bit more than half, is coming because the global ocean levels are rising. But in addition to that, here in New Jersey, we also have subsidence of the land for geological reasons. And when you combine the two, that's produced the 16-inch rise in 100 years. Our best estimates for the future, perhaps another 16 inches by 2050, but with sizable error bars, and just under 4 feet by 2100, again with a fairly wide range. Why is there such a wide range? Some of it is uncertainty about how rapidly global temperatures will increase, but a lot of it is uncertainty about how quickly the big ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica will melt. Recently, they've been melting more rapidly. If those trends continue, that could lead to the higher end of that range. If there are short-term fluctuations, we'll probably see the lower end. When we think about historic water levels at Sandy Hook, certainly Sandy was a very unusual event. The tide gauge at Sandy Hook stopped working when it reached 13.2 feet. This was more than 3 feet higher than the previous record levels that occurred during Hurricane Donna in 1960 and during the December '92 nor'easter. However, I want to focus your attention on all of the other events that have produced water levels high enough to be classified as moderate or major tidal flooding. These are events that happen much more frequently. If you project what those same weather events would have, no change in the frequency of storms, just seeing what we've seen in the past, by the end of the century, all of these storms, if we were to have clones of them in the future, would produce water levels as high or higher than Sandy did. So while the meteorology of Sandy may have been a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the impacts may not be as a result of sea level rise. The future will not be the same as the past. The other day, as I was preparing this talk and trying to come up with a good way to finish, I thought of some of the things that I heard in the days after Sandy as people spoke about why they didn't evacuate or why they didn't take more precautions to secure important infrastructure. And they said things like this: we never had floods like this before. There was no reason for us to think that this would happen here. We had flooding in areas we never had flooding before. The house has been in the family since 1964, and there's never been a problem with weather. They thought they'd be safe because they never had flooding before. This way of thinking will not serve us very well in the future. First of all, it's always very dangerous because our memory when it comes to events like this, even scientifically, is relatively short. We've only had modern measurements for 100 years or so. There are events like the 1821 hurricane that produced the previous record high water level in New York City that, if it had happened at high tide instead of low tide, would have been worse than Sandy. We know that events like that can happen, and now we also know that there are systematic changes in the flooding baseline that are going to affect us in the future. How can we prepare for those future impacts? Well, from a scientific standpoint, we can recognize that the past is not an adequate guide to what will happen in the future. We can use information from climate model projections with careful interpretation to develop an understanding of the effects of a changing climate baseline. In doing that, we can focus on the aspects of climate change that we understand with high confidence, and sea level rise is one of them. There's no uncertainty that sea levels will continue to rise. How much? There is uncertainty, but the direction we're sure about. Rather than focusing on some of the areas that are more uncertain, such as the changes in storm frequency and intensity that we need to learn more about. And we can develop improved methods for making projections of the effects of climate change on high-impact weather events. I'm going to finish by showing you two examples. This is from a study that's been done for Lower Manhattan, but in principle it applies for the New Jersey shore as well. The black curve is an effort to use modern modeling methods to estimate the return periods for flood levels at the Battery. And the scale may be hard to see if you're in the back of the room, but on the left, that's the 10-year return period. So the black curve, today's climate, that's about a meter of storm surge. And it's on a log scale, so then we have 100, 1,000, and 10,000 years. We don't have data going back 10,000 years, but we have models that we can use to apply the laws of physics and estimate what the return periods of these truly extreme events may be. The blue and red curves in each of these charts are projections for the last 2 decades of the 21st century, taking into account sea level rise and taking into account different model projections of how the risk of tropical cyclones will change. The models don't all agree. That's why the 4 panels are different. But they certainly all indicate that the flood levels for a particular return period are going to be increasing over the course of this century. When it comes to severe weather events, we can look at the conditions that are associated with events like the derecho event of June. Severe thunderstorms and tornadoes occur where moisture is abundant, the atmosphere is unstable, and vertical wind shear is large. And we can look at some of the quantities, and for the weather geeks, there are the technical terms for these quantities in the lower right. But basically, the take-home message is that the blue bars show the frequency of these severe weather events in today's climate. The red bars, how they would be projected to be later in the century. And this work, which is cutting edge, very preliminary, certainly way too uncertain to base policy on at this point, is suggesting that the threats of those severe thunderstorm/tornado strong wind events that we get in summer may also be increasing. So my bottom line is that while there are certainly policy and social science dimensions to the questions that we're facing today, from the standpoint of natural science, there are things we can say about the future, and that it should be our goal to try to take those things to account as we plan for the future. Thank you very much. And I'll just quickly flash the answers to my 4 questions, and thank you again for your attention.
So I'm not sure for this first panel if we'll have time for questions, but let me before I give you this announcement, we have a number of seats up here in the front, so all of those of you who are clamoring on the steps, if you want to come up, this is a good time since we're not having breaks. So just before I introduce Megan, this is a terrific time to come up. If you have questions, you can jot them down on your note cards and hand them over to the center aisle, and we'll be collecting them. Thank you. Just also, as folks are moving down to the front, come on down. If Tony's presentation has whet your appetite, I encourage you to go to our website. Again, it's on that Save the Date paper in the back, where you can see presentations from our conference last year that shows you science data like this, but it also has presenters who talk about what the impacts of that science is on public health, on agriculture, on economics. So chock full of data, and as I mentioned, we'll be rolling out some new materials on Monday. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Megan Lincoln, who's an atmospheric perils specialist at the Swiss Re Reinsurance America Corporation. She drove down here this morning and hit a traffic accident. Not her, she was in the traffic, and came down from Westchester County. We're awfully grateful for that effort that she made. At Swiss Re, her responsibility is development of tools and techniques for underwriters and actuaries to use in assessing insurance risks posed globally by hurricanes, tornadoes, hail, and winter storms. And she also provides real-time weather forecasts during impending catastrophic events. She's one of Swiss Re's experts on climate change. And while she received her graduate degrees outside of New Jersey, we know that she's a proud alumnus of Rutgers University and a student of Tony Broccoli's. And in addition to serving on the New York City panel on climate change, she is a member of the advisory committee for the New Jersey Climate Adaptation Alliance. Meg.
Thank you very much, Jean. How do I get this? Oh, there we go. Let's see. Yep. Okay, good morning, everyone. As Jean said, I work in the insurance industry, but on a personal level, this is something that matters deeply to me because in addition to being a graduate of Rutgers University, my parents have owned a home in Ocean Beach, New Jersey since 1985, and my grandparents owned a home down there from 1959 to 2004. I have spent every summer at the Jersey Shore since I was a child, and my first job was at Colonial Bakery on Route 35 North in Lavallette, New Jersey. So, needless to say, this is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. So a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. Look a little bit about the state by the numbers and what Sandy did from an economic perspective. What are the coastal hazards that face the state? Some will be a little bit repetitive with regards to Tony's presentation. How do we bring in the private sector, specifically the reinsurance and the insurance industry, because we think in a risk management framework? And how can our way of thinking help policymakers plan for the future and for the redevelopment of the coastline? And then finally, some concluding thoughts. So the state of New Jersey by the numbers. In the 2010 census, New Jersey recorded approximately 8.8 million people, with about 3 million located in the coastal counties, which for the purposes of this analysis were Cape May, Atlantic, Monmouth, Ocean, and Hudson. And this is approximately 34% of the state's population. The leisure, hospitality, and recreation sector of the economy, which includes tourism, generated about $43.4 billion of the 2010 gross state product, which is 8.9% of the total gross state product. And most of the tourism, or most of the revenue, is generated by tourism at the New Jersey Shore. The Barnegat Bay, which is one of the largest bodies of brackish water in the world, generates about $4 billion in annual economic activity, $2.3 billion in ecosystem services, and about $2 billion in annual wages. And this is from an article that was just published in the Asbury Park Press, and something they noted in there, which I did not write down, is that because of the unique ecosystem aspects of the Barnegat Bay, its actual value is almost immeasurable. And then within the state of New Jersey, the economic sensitivity of the gross state product due to weather variability, so how variations in weather can affect the economic output from year to year, is about 8 to 10% of the gross state product, which is, if you look at this map on the right, it's in yellow. So New Jersey is relatively sensitive to weather variability when compared to many other states. Let's look at the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. On the left is a picture taken in Ortley Beach on November 17th by the Toms River Police Department. And I have to say, the images that I have seen coming out are absolutely stunning. What my parents told me when they drove down there is mind-boggling. And I can't imagine. I used to drive across the Manilokin Bridge to get to my house, and right now, I can't. There was severe damage from the storm to infrastructure, mass transit, and the highway system. On average, 30 to 40 feet of beach was lost along the coast. FEMA performed an aerial assessment right after the storm and estimated that 72,000 buildings were impacted by Sandy. 500 of the structures were flat out destroyed and reduced to rubble. 5,000 structures suffered major damage, and 24,000 suffered minor damage. In terms of cost, $29.4 billion was estimated by the governor's office in physical economic damage, and this does not necessarily account for the impact on the tourism industry, the impact on real estate prices, and how much it will cost to replenish our beaches and rebuild our coast. From the insurance side, the insured losses in New Jersey are estimated around $4 billion. And the total NFIP losses, this is nationwide, not just New Jersey specific, are approximately $12 billion according to Business Insurance. But obviously the bottom three numbers are subject to change as more claims are filed and as we better understand the extent of the damage caused by the storm. So where does Sandy stand in history with regards to economic losses? And the chart shows the economic losses from coastal storms in as-if 2012 values. So these not only account for inflation, it accounts for changes in population and changes in asset value as well. And this is all storms that produced at least $100 million of economic loss today. And you can see that the two notable events are Hurricane Irene in 2011, which produced around $4.5 billion in economic loss, and the Ash Wednesday storm, which, if that recurred today, would produce about $5 billion in loss. The third notable event is the December 92 nor'easter, which is about $1 billion to $2 billion. And on the right, you can see that this is not the first time that we've had a storm which has done some serious damage on the coast. On the right, the picture is taken in Harvey Cedars after the 1962 nor'easter, which did a lot of damage in southern New Jersey. However, still, none of these storms come close to the economic damage that Sandy produced. The estimated economic losses from Sandy are 5 to 6 times the second largest event, which, as I said, is the Ash Wednesday nor'easter. And the picture at the bottom is right after the storm went through the inlet that was cut at the Manilokin Bridge, and all those homes were unfortunately washed away. So we have never seen an event like Sandy before that has produced losses on the level that Sandy has. So what are some of the coastal hazards that face New Jersey? And Tony talked about this very eloquently in his presentation, so I will not bore you by being very repetitive. Sandy's storm surge ranged from 8 to 14 feet in the New York, New Jersey metro area, and Tony gave a very eloquent description of why the sea level has increased. A Category 3 hurricane striking the New Jersey coast today, and the plots on the left are from the National Hurricane Center, their storm surge model that they run, would bring a storm tide between 10 to 25 feet. While Hurricane Sandy had, or Superstorm Sandy, had a central pressure comparable to a Category 3 hurricane, its wind speeds, while they extended over a very large area, were not comparable to a Category 3 hurricane. So if a storm came up here as a Category 3, the storm surge in areas could potentially be much worse. If you look at the Raritan Bay, the storm tide, which is the storm surge, plus the variation in tide, and this model run is performed at high tide, could bring potentially 20 to 25 feet of storm surge into the Raritan Bay. And because that sea level has risen and is projected to continue to rise, by 2050, another storm less intense than Sandy will be able to generate a higher storm tide along the coast in the New York, New Jersey metro area by mid-century. Now, with regards to the wind, Sandy was a very anomalous storm because it essentially was a hurricane that then took on the worst characteristics of a nor'easter as it moved north. And as Sandy pulled away from the southeastern United States, it followed the Gulf Stream north. And the Gulf Stream was running on average approximately 1/2 to 2.5 degrees above average. So as the storm center moved over the Gulf Stream, the center of the storm was able to extract energy from the ocean surface, which is how hurricanes traditionally intensify and maintain their intensity, while the outer area of the storm was able to expand due to the interaction with the system that was moving in from the west. And as Tony said earlier, we do not have a good idea as to how hurricanes will change in a globally warmed world yet, but there have been some research done, and this is done by GFDL, and the research right now suggests that while there will potentially be an overall decrease in tropical cyclone frequency, there could be an increase in the most severe events. Those are Category 4 and Category 5 storms. Category 4 storms have wind speeds of at least 130 miles an hour. So we're looking at potential impacts from sea level rise, which can be very severe because as the sea level rises, the storm surge will be exacerbated. And with significantly more uncertainty, how the intensity of the wind field of these storms will respond if the ocean is warmer. So how can the reinsurance and the insurance industry step in and help, and what can be done to plan for future events? If we look at the immediate after, if we look at the few days immediately after the storm, there was a lot that had to be done on the public sector side, from the emergency services to debris clearing to repairs to rescue services. On a typical day in late October, the Toms River, New Jersey 911 dispatch receives about 250 calls. This comes from an interview that was done with News 12 right after the event. In the 24 hours after Hurricane Sandy, more than 1,300 calls were logged. New Jersey Transit estimates that between 1/4 to 1/3 of its rolling stock was damaged by Sandy, and 7 million people were affected by power losses. And if you think back to the earlier slide that I showed, where I showed the total state's population of 8.8 million, that's about 80% of the state's population that lost power during the event. Approximately 333,922 cubic yards of Sandy-related debris was removed from only 6 towns in Monmouth and Ocean County: Asbury Park, Beach Haven, Eatontown, Howell, Long Branch, and Middletown. This doesn't even count the towns on the Barrier Islands, Union Beach, Keyport, Belford, and other areas that were also hit very, 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 very hard. Also, there's been a lot of discussion surrounding flood insurance. The reason that the insured losses in New Jersey are so low while the economic losses are so high is because flood insurance for residential properties and small commercial properties is purchased through the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. And since 1978, it has paid out $33.8 billion. Now, this is real US dollars, so I did not adjust the earlier numbers for inflation or wealth or population changes. However, since 2001, 5 multi-billion-dollar losses have occurred, leaving the NFIP in $18 billion of debt. Katrina was obviously the most notable of these events. The most recent was Hurricane Irene in 2011. And the NFIP has borrowing capacity up to $20 billion. And if Sandy has caused $12 billion in losses, there's going to be a shortfall. So in 2012, when the NFIP was renewed, it came with a congressional mandate to investigate mechanisms to bring in the private insurance market. And this has obviously intensified after the storm. And Governor Cuomo in New York created a task force to address many, 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 many issues after the event, including infrastructure, rebuilding, transportation. And one of the points on his agenda is to look at how can the insurance industry come in and play a role as well. And there's 2 ways. The first is traditional insurance and reinsurance solutions. They are possible and viable because due to the fact that there has been improvements in scientific knowledge and computing capability, the insurance industry can now come up with models for floods and models for flood losses. And if you can model potential floods and potential flood losses, you can determine how much an insurance product should cost. And there's also private-public partnerships, which is what I'm going to focus on a little more in this discussion. And these are risk transfer solutions that provide rapid financing to a government client in the wake of a natural disaster. And this could be used to offset those costs that I discussed that were incurred on the earlier slide. Additional emergency services personnel, immediate repairs that need to be done, debris clearing. So how do parametric solutions work? Parametric solutions work because they are very, 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 very simple. This is an example from a transaction that we have in Mexico, which is referred to as multicat. And the Mexican government started this in 2006, and it has been renewed, I believe, now through 2015. And essentially what the Mexican government did is they identified areas which were at high risk from being impacted by hurricanes, and they drew boxes around them which have distinct latitude and longitude points. And I'm going to zoom in on the Yucatan for a second, which contains Cozumel and Cancun. And the Mexican government said that if a hurricane with a central pressure of at least 920 millibars or lower goes through this box, we want a payment. And a structure like this is obviously very easy to confirm. You have the box. After a storm occurs, you take the data points from the National Hurricane Center and determine if the storm met the parameters as it passes through the box. And this results in a very, very, very rapid payment. And this is just one of the benefits of parametric insurance. And this slide compares how parametric insurance compares to more traditional insurance. If you have a parametric cover and you get a payout from the parametric cover, it can be used at the buyer's discretion. If a town, a municipality, a county, a state, a government purchases a parametric solution and receive a payment, they can use the funds where they need those funds. Whereas traditional insurance, because you receive a payment when you experience a loss, it's intended to cover the loss that is sustained, replace a building, repair a car, etc. The speed of the payment. As I said, with these parametric insurance products, you need the information about the events, which is available in near real time. So the payout is very rapid. The period is about 2 to 6 weeks. Whereas for a traditional insurance product, it's subject to loss adjustment, so it can be slow. You have a claims adjuster come out, the claims adjuster comes up with a number, you submit a claim, you wait for your payment. The corollary is the third row, which is the loss adjustment and the administration process. Parametric solutions don't have much claims administration. You go on to the National Hurricane Center and pull off the information. We also have products that cover earthquakes, so you go into the USGS, you pull out the relevant information. You don't need much claims administration. Whereas if you experience a loss, you obviously need to hire a claims adjuster to come out and determine the amount of your loss. Transparency. Parametric triggers are very, very easy to explain. As I said, in the case of multicat in Mexico, a box was drawn around the Yucatan Peninsula. If the storm passes through with a central pressure of 920 millibars or less, a payout occurs. Whereas with a traditional insurance product, if you have numerous policies, the loss settlement can be a little more complex to explain. Pricing flexibility. For traditional insurance, your price is basically the cost of your property is related to the cost of your property, the risk that you face, what type of insurance you're purchasing. Whereas on the parametric side, because the structure is event-based, these are very bespoke products. They can be tailored to fit the budget of the buyer. And finally, changes in exposure. And this is important on the reinsurance side. Reinsurers, we don't write individual insurance policies. We insure the primary insurers, so the Allstates, the Geicos, the State Farms. And obviously, if their exposure changes from year to year, we need to know that. If they start covering less properties in Louisiana and start covering more in Texas, that's going to be relevant for how we analyze their portfolio of business. Whereas with the parametric solutions, because it's based on an event, you don't need to look at the underlying exposure from year to year because you're looking at the frequency of a hurricane or you're looking at the frequency of an earthquake. These are fairly common already in both developing and developed countries. As I already talked about Mexico, Mexico was one of the earlier transactions in 2006. Currently, they have $290 million US of coverage in hurricane and earthquake. And the whole point is that the funds cover emergency expenses immediately following a disaster. And this is in the form of an insurance-linked security, which means it's an instrument in the financial market. CRIF, which stands for Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, has $111 in million dollars in coverage for hurricane and earthquake. And this is a pool of Caribbean countries. There's 16 that exist. And the idea of the CRIF is that the governments buy into this program, and immediately after a disaster occurs, if they qualify, they receive a financial payout. And the idea is that it injects liquidity into the government right after an event occurs. And this is parametric reinsurance and a derivative, so another type of a financial product. There's examples of this in the United States. The state of Alabama, we do not disclose their transaction size, but they have a structure, a parametric insurance structure with us as well. And this is to pay for increased insurance costs following hurricanes. And their form is just, it's an insurance form. And then the University of Texas Medical Branch, which has a campus in Galveston, also purchased a parametric solution to cover hurricanes in the area. And that was done to, if an event impacts the Galveston campus, they want to cover the losses so that the university system as a whole doesn't suffer all that much. And this too is written as an insurance product. So some concluding thoughts. I'm going to do good news, bad news, good news. The good news, and while this is certainly not how I think any of us wanted it to happen, Sandy does present the state with an opportunity to fortify the coast and its communities by implementing cohesive dune systems, stricter building codes, and a risk management framework and planning. The bad news is that coastal areas already are highly exposed to storm surge and damaging winds, and we already know that anthropogenic climate change has exacerbated storm surge and will continue to exacerbate storm surge due to sea level rise. However, the good news is that risk management strategies and product offerings from the private reinsurance industry can help the state of New Jersey and its municipalities both maintain the insurability of the coastal region and financially prepare for significant weather events. And I think there's no question that rebuilding a resilient coast is going to be a joint effort between the government, the private sector, and academia. But I'm pretty sure that when you look at that picture, how could you not want to redevelop a sustainable coast? It's a beautiful area. This was taken on my beach. And I think quotes that came out of the Home News and Tribune and the Star Ledger said it most eloquently. The Jersey Shore, for those of us born and raised here, is more than a summertime destination. It is in our bones and our blood. It defines our state, and it defines us. The New Jersey Shore is our most valuable resource, natural and otherwise, on levels that go so much deeper than money. And that's so true. And then finally, the boss said it the best. Down the shore, everything is all right. So thank you, and if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Maybe we could take just a couple questions if we have any. No, yeah, oh, wait. We'll take maybe 2 questions. Nope. Okay. Oh, okay, thank you. I can read it. Thank you. Okay. I feel like I'm a game show host here. What? Parametric insurance looks similar to an individual's umbrella policy, like for catastrophic circumstances. How about, I don't know what that word is. Less losses. Less losses.
Can I get a better, is this on? Okay.
There you go.
Can the question be explained a little better? I'm not 100% sure what's being asked. Well, I don't work on the primary insurance side. I work on the reinsurance side. And as I said, parametric products are not designed for an individual. They're designed for a government. They're designed for either at the federal, the state, the local level to receive an injection of cash immediately after an event. And they can distribute it as they see fit. And if they want to purchase a parametric insurance product where they then turn around to their citizens and say, we're going to purchase this product, whoever wants to buy in can buy in, that's at their discrepancy. But to close the gap between primary policies and catastrophic losses, that's not necessarily the goal of a parametric product, and that's also not the side I work in.
And if you guys want to talk offline at the end, I know Megan's going to be lingering around a little bit. Actually, here's a question I think everyone should know the answer to, because Tony keeps trying to drill it into my head, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. So the question is, why did Tony keep calling Sandy a tropical cyclone? What's the difference from a hurricane?
Okay. So tropical cyclone is the generic term that includes hurricanes. For a storm to be declared a hurricane, it has to have wind speeds, sustained wind speeds at or above 74 miles an hour. Below that level, it would be a tropical storm rather than a hurricane. Both tropical storms and hurricanes are tropical cyclones. We also use that term because in other parts of the world, the term hurricane isn't used, even though they get identical types of storms. In the Western Pacific, we call them typhoons, and in the Australian region and in the Indian Ocean, they're called cyclones. So a tropical cyclone is basically a low-pressure system that occurs in the tropics, and the strongest ones in this part of the world we call hurricanes.
And there'll be a quiz on that at the end of the morning. Please join me in thanking both Tony and Megan for joining us today. And let me suggest, as we're changing panels, it's a great time for those of you sitting on the steps. If you want to come sit in the first pew here in church, there's lots of seats open. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, Tony, Megan. Terrific job. As we said in the beginning, there's no breaks because we've got a lot to cover. As you can see, your minds are hopefully have a little more room to absorb some more information. I'm going to call up our second panel, which will be, oh, there's Rob. Here's Ed. Which will be moderated by Rob Freudenberg. Rob is the New Jersey Director of the Regional Plan Association, where he manages RPA's New Jersey program focused on sustainability, planning, and policy. And Rob, it's yours.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Well, we're glad to be here this morning. Regional Plan Association is glad to be a partner in this event. If you don't know Regional Plan Association, we're a 90-year-old nonprofit, independent planning organization that takes a long-term regional view of development in the tri-state area. Like many of you, we are eager to work together in this time period, drawing on our individual strengths to collaborate together on our response to this tragic event. We have a window of opportunity now to work within, and it will require all of our efforts. Coming this February, RPA will be starting some regional conversations with experts, and we're going to be reaching out to many of you for these. And we hope eventually to bring what we learn in these conversations to the local level, to communities, so that we can be working with communities to be better prepared for these events. And we hope to work together with you to do that. So as an organization, RPA, following the days of Hurricane Sandy, like many others, we knew that this storm signaled an opportunity for smart response to tragic events. In beginning to chart our own course for how we as an organization would respond to Sandy and the efforts to rebuild, we knew we didn't have to look too far for guidance. Dr. Ed Blakely has been on RPA's board of directors since 2003. With over 40 years of experience in all aspects of urban and regional planning, Ed's work is known both nationally and internationally. And with a particular penchant for disaster management, Ed has led or helped to lead recovery efforts. Following the 1989 earthquake and 91 fires in California, Ed worked closely with RPA and others on recovery following 9/11. And in more recent years, Ed was appointed to lead the recovery of New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. Ed is willing to tackle tough issues in difficult times. And that is why we're pleased that Ed is here with us today to share with us lessons he's learned from Katrina, California, and maybe even Australia, where Ed is currently posted. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ed Blakely.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the only RPA director in Sydney, Australia, and it gives you some idea of how New Yorkers understand geography. I came over here, my plane took off in Australia on the very day this event occurred, and when I landed, I received a call from Bob Yarrow saying, "We need your help," and I've been here ever since. It seems that every place I go, there's a disaster. So I don't feel welcome. I was having dinner at my daughter's home on Thanksgiving, and her husband was speaking to some people over dinner. I'd gone out to the washroom. When I came back, he said, "My father-in-law is really a disaster." I don't know what he meant by that, but I'm trying to hope that he meant the right thing. It's hard. I'm going to talk about how you rebuild and renew. The evidence you had is pretty clear. But let me go through some of the things we did in New Orleans primarily, but I'll mention some other places I've been in. New Orleans devastation was worse than the devastation here, not in size or scope, but on impact. 85% of the city was underwater for 52 days. That is hard to conceive of. It's hard to deal with. It took, if you can imagine the Superdome, like the Giants and Jets stadiums being filled 10 times to remove the debris, that's millions of tons of debris that had to be moved out. All the residents had to be moved out. So it's an incredible amount of disaster in the sense of human, physical, social, and economic. And the damage of New Orleans was very complete. So, where do you start? Well, the challenges are to get the notion that we just talked about right. The past is not prologue. That we can't look to the past weather conditions anymore, or the past building codes anymore, or the past things that we've done to find answers. And everyone's roles change. The role of government changes, the role of business, the role of nonprofits change. So everything's in change. It's not just the weather that's going to change. It's going to be all those other institutions that have to adapt to this new circumstance. But we all have to start understanding the same book. What is this catastrophe? If it's continuing, what are the data that we need to have to understand where we can build, how we can build, and how we can live with it and live through it the way the Dutch do? They talk about living with the water, not trying to do something about it. And how do we get everyone involved so that everyone understands what the dimensions are and what they have to do? These are the 4 sectors that I think all of you who are in this room have to get your heads around, because this is not a one-size-fits-all. It's a streamlined organizational approach that takes these 4 sectors into account that have to work together. The first is economic development, and that might seem strange, but your economy is deeply affected by these events, and it is not just temporary. In a global economy, when a firm decides to move, it can move anywhere. And I'll bet for some firms in New Jersey, Kansas City is looking good now. Away from the water, of course. So we discovered this in New Orleans, that many firms that seemed to be permanent all of a sudden were located elsewhere. The other thing is you have to retool how you deal with business. The old way of just collecting the taxes and sweeping the streets will not be enough. Then you have to look at your housing and community facilities, and I'm going to go into this a great deal later. But housing now has to be thought of as a place of refuge, and community facilities have to be thought of as evacuation centers. You can't build a future community center of large scale without thinking about using it for your evacuation, because evacuation outward is expensive, life-threatening, and a bit foolish. The best evacuations are inward. And you have to put together all your neighborhood facilities, and I'm going to talk about this more. When you're rebuilding your school and library, you have to think, do we need both the school and the library, or can we combine those facilities and come up with something stronger, more resilient? And it means a parent only has to make one stop when they pick up their kid, and they can go to the gym, and that can be the gym that everyone's using. It can also be where the coffee shop is and things like this. So we can live smarter and retool all of our institutions to be smarter places. And how do we enhance this institutional array that's in this room so that we all work together, retool this system of single-purpose, nonprofit, and community-based organizations so they're multi-purpose? Because we're going to have to go out and raise money. And if you're in a foundation, you've probably heard the same story 10 or 15 times already. But if those 15 people came together and brought one story to you, it'd be a lot easier to take, and you'd understand how you could deliver it. So that's the first lesson. Here's some principles that I hope New Jersey is using. And I'm not sure in most of the disasters I worked in we used very well, but I know these are very strong, important principles. A partnership among all government agencies. This is no time for a government agency to play hero. Japan is a primary example of that, where several government agencies declared they were supposed to lead in this disaster, and it's paralyzed the nation up until then. Secondly, speak with one voice. It's important for the leadership, the governor, and I know he's doing a good job here, and Governor Cuomo is in New York. It's very important for them to do the things they're doing, putting together a team that can lead this recovery and make sure that they're saying the same things about the same evidence to deliver the same packages. And these are really regional opportunities. As you saw on all the maps, I didn't see one of them where the storm knew exactly where New York stopped and New Jersey began. There was no storm record between Jefferson Parish and New Orleans. We were in it together. And we're all in this together. This entire region is in this together. And someone, somewhere, somehow, and hopefully RPA will play a role, needs to help us all understand that we share this coastline and we share the future of this entire region. And the mix of federal and state funding is very important to understand. Federal money, as I say, comes with chains on it. State money with ropes on it. And your insurance money might have strings on it. But when you get federal money, you sometimes cannot use your state money, called double dipping. We had a situation in New Orleans where volunteers fixed firehouses and FEMA would not recognize our claims. So sometimes a volunteer effort may turn into a big disaster. Many federal funds cannot be commingled. So when I was using HUD funds, I had to be careful I was not using FEMA funds on the same building at the same time. So we had carve-outs. This room is the FEMA room. This room is the HUD room. This room is the Department of Transportation room. And each one of them had a different accounting system. So it takes immense expertise to do this and do this well. And local capacity is very important. I understand that New Jersey probably has more cities than any place in the world. Which means in some cases, the mayor is also the planner, also the fire chief, also the Mikado. And when you're dealing with a plethora of federal funds and the like, it's important that that person who's in charge knows what they're doing and how they're doing it so they can in fact lead and can get the right resources behind them to make all this work. And the last one's very important. FEMA will give you money to repair. Think about getting money to rebuild and to make it better. So in some cases in New Orleans, we didn't take FEMA money because it was for repair. We took other money so that we could rebuild something better and safer and smarter. It's not to say you shouldn't take FEMA money. It's all good money. So building safe buildings is not what we're about. It's building safe communities. In the pictures you saw earlier, many homes were affected. So how do we make a safer community? And the template in your mind shouldn't be rescuing single homeowners, but how do we make a better community? In most of the disasters I've been in, almost 40% of the people elect not to return. But they don't all do that on one block. And if you're not careful, you're going to have this business where one person's here, then there's a vacancy, and then another, and another, and another, and the community's unsafe because of this kind of gap-tooth process that you're left with. So how do we build back a community that was there and not just single buildings? And how do we make sure that these rules are followed, that there's equitable redevelopment? Some communities that don't have a community-based organization get left behind. And some of you who are in stronger organizations have to reach out to minorities and others to ensure that they're all dealt with together and that you restore vital neighborhoods. And isn't this a time to look at how we can have efficient and effective government? And I mentioned that with schools and libraries, where we had to work together in New Orleans to deliver a more effective situation and stronger neighborhoods. And at some point, and we had to do it in Oakland and every place else, we had to reassemble the land. We had to make sure that people could be accommodated in safer places, and you might have to do that here. Here are some principles that we used. I think this is getting on the same page as I said earlier. Having a set of principles as your framework for recovery, a consultation process that's ongoing. Every community organization will have a seminar, a summit, or what have you, but it'd be a very good idea if you had a series of summits with the same speakers, giving the same information so everybody was together, and that this didn't go away. This is, and you're not going to hear this is a decade-long process. This is not going to be over next year or the year after. And if another storm hits, and my experience is every disaster I've been in has been followed by another disaster. In New Orleans, it was the oil spill. In Japan, it was the nuclear reactors. In Australia, we are now facing, after those major floods, the potential for fires. And we know we will have them. So how do we improve community safety and security? And that means starting with the neighborhood, the family, and the like. And I'm a strong believer in neighborhood community safety programs, where somebody in the neighborhood, like the old civil defense system that was around when I was around the 50s and 60s, Governor probably remembers it, right, Governor? That there was somebody in your neighborhood had a little cap that they put on and said, come here, this is where the shelter is. The food is located here. The systems are located here. In California, where I grew up, we did drills, and they still do drills in the Bay Area to make sure that everybody knows what they're going to do in a disaster. And the worst thing to do in California is to go find your kids. You should know where your kids are. And the kids are supposed to go to the school and be under the desk and not trying to come to you. You want to get the people off the roads. And you call a telephone number out of state or text out of state because the local lines are down. And people have to know that drill. So safety starts in the home with the go bag, etc. The place you go. Every business needs to know where their people are going to go and what follows from that. And every individual in New Orleans, no one could report to work unless they showed us they had a family plan. You cannot come to work unless you know where your family is and how they're protected. You're going to have to rebuild your economy. This is the time when there's some people in their 60s and 70s who run a very good business in your neighborhood who say, this is it. I'm not going to open that up. I'm not going to reopen that barbershop or that pizza parlor or whatever. And you can't have gaps there either. So it's not just thinking about the neighborhood in the old way. How do we think about it in a new way where we might have to have new owners, new operators, and a new configuration in this neighborhood? And then build the infrastructure for the next century. The temptation is to repair, to get through this. But if there's another one next year and the year after, we can't do that. We can't afford it. So we should resist that temptation and build smart. Look at your housing and settlement pattern now. So here's kind of streamlined delivery system that we've used in a number of different places, where the state has its organization or institution that corrals the needs of everyone. So the needs assessment, and I assume there's someone here from FEMA who will tell you about the needs assessment, but having that needs assessment is very important. And priorities have to be made from that needs assessment, and they need to be consistent. So it's very important that that be put together through a strong state organization. The state's economic development department has to get involved in this, and the infrastructure. When I was in Australia and I heard about this disaster coming, before I got on the plane, I said, I wonder how many people lose power this time. Because this seems to be the same old song. Now, maybe this is a time we ought to think about where those power lines are and how power is distributed. Shouldn't every firehouse, shouldn't every civic building have a solar array on top of it and emergency generators? Shouldn't every gas station be equipped with gas and solar so that they can operate? Seems to me they should. Financing and funding. Don't connect funding with financing. Funding is what comes from the government. Financing is what comes from the insurance companies and the like. In New Orleans, we had to borrow $230 million to get our program started from the private sector. If we hadn't done that, we couldn't start our reimbursement system. So every one of your communities has to have money in the till. Where's it going to come from? Hopefully you've got the reinsurance that was discussed. And your neighborhood housing and community services, the people who can least afford it are in a hotel someplace and they can't get back home without you, and clears the health services. This is what we did in New Orleans. We outsourced it. That's what I did in Oakland, California as well. We outsourced it. We hired a firm to do all the project management across 42 different jurisdictions within the city. They did all the project management, helped us pull together all the FEMA reimbursements, all our public firms, private firms, and we used design build primarily as the way of moving things quickly so that we could get buildings up in a priority order smoothly and operating. But this does not excuse government. Government does what it does best here. It governs, it organizes, it directs. So they come out with a stronger government at the end of this process and not a weaker one. Bundle your projects. There's a temptation to put up a bunch of projects. The fire department, the police department, everyone wants to put their projects up. And you have stresses in that system. One of my rules is I only want to open the street once. If we're going to dig a hole in this street, let's do it one time, put the optic cable in, put everything in, and when we close it up, we've got the firehouse, we've got the school, we've got the neighborhood, all done. Let's not do this over and over and over again. Make sure that all the clients are really involved, directly involved, but make sure you know what your target is. In many cases, and I've already heard about the seniors who've been living along the coast and so on, but the target for this recovery are the people you see here. Because if we don't do something fast and they can't find jobs early, this is what happens. That's our economy. Our economy is the smart young people who are going to this university and others who will build the new jobs We can't lose them. We can't stumble. We've got to build something better, smarter, and safer, and in the process, use their talents while we're doing it. And the first thing we have to do is restore the environment, because that is our safety valve. If we restore the environment, if we put the dunes back, if we put strong environmental barriers in, and I've been going along the coast, and every place that I've found barriers, I've found less damage. I don't think that's an accident. Some communities refuse to have barriers, and they're wiped out. The phase one of all this is to focus on some of the things I've been talking about. Let's make sure we get all those things, the flood protection, the public transport, and all that stuff right first. And this is going to anger some homeowners and others, because the second thing is neighborhood renewal. But until you have the sewers, the gutters, and all that other stuff, and that infrastructure right, you're building a neighborhood that may not survive the next time. So the second phase is the neighborhood renewal and development. And later on, I can talk about that if you want me to. We had to create certain neighborhoods, and certain neighborhoods we couldn't. And then finally, all the implementation stuff, and that's what takes years. And this gives you some ideas of all the different kinds of money that we had coming in New Orleans. School money was different from sewer and water money, and Department of Transportation money, and all these are on the same street. So you need someone to coordinate all this. It doesn't happen by accident. And in many cases, I was in rooms where the people from these various agencies had never met one another until this catastrophe. I hope that's not true here. Help people help themselves is my rule. That if people can help design the end system with the knowledge and information, they'll come to the same conclusion the experts will. But they have to be helped with the information, and they can put the dots in the right place. Make sure that you have what I call a mantra. In ours, it was called the target areas in New Orleans. And any of you who've read anything about me, I hope you found that out. They've written a lot of other things. But the city is still being built around those target areas because they're the high and dry places. So it has to be a clear mantra where people understand it, and it has to be measurable and visual. And here's how we did our target areas. As you can see, here's Mayor Nagin, and notice my eyes are right on the check. We're at there. The mayor's a little distracted, but I'm not. This is the kind of money we got, $529 million. I know the governors have gone to Washington and made their cases and so on, but the federal government tends to operate through its agencies. So that money does not come as one check. Wish it did. But it'll come from all the kinds of institutions you see here. And a vast array, and some of that money can be moved around, some of it can't. I went to Washington 32 times in 2 years. After a while, the security guy said, "Doc, get on a plane. Come back with some money. You don't need this screening. The only thing we're going to screen you for is money when you return." So $529 million isn't a lot of money. For those of you who are developers, this is one shopping center. So we had to step on this and make it several billion dollars. So you have to leverage that money. This is a timeline we set up. It's very important that you have a timeline that people can see, that's visible, that's understandable, that's clear. And with so many small jurisdictions, how can you do a timeline where everybody can come together along the coastline with a single timeline, using the money intelligently? The road doesn't stop from one city to another. It has to be all coordinated. So there needs to be a single timeline, and people are more confident when they know there's a timeline. I think it's very important to start with the future and not the past. The pictures we just saw were pictures of the past. The memories we just heard are memories of the past. What do you want to be in the future? My father used to ask me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I'm 75. I've not been able to answer that question. But I'm still searching. So what future do we want to have for New Jersey? The economy here is going to change, not just on the coast, but the entire state's economy is going to change. Let's talk about what changes it's going to go through and how we play a role. How do we get these joint facilities going so that we don't have so many clusters of little things that get destroyed and we have stronger, better things? The Japanese have done an excellent job with that. We divided our target areas into this category, places you could rebuild, redevelopment, or renew, so that everyone wasn't getting the same treatment and the money could go to the process. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on that, but each of these had charrettes, and the people were involved in drawing out how they wanted the community to look in the future, not just in the current time. And then we developed a housing program that encouraged people to move to safety by giving them a soft second. For those of you who don't know what that is a second mortgage that if you live in the house a certain amount of time, it is forgiven. So if you moved to a safer area, took your insurance money and other money into one of these neighborhoods, you got a $60,000 soft second or smaller, depending on what you needed. If you stayed there 3 years, it was forgiven. That was an encouragement to move because we found so few people who had enough insurance money to rebuild. Only the wealthy could rebuild. Other people could not. Lesson 3, insourcing. Wherever you can, use local firms, local organizations, local institutions. Here's a chance to do a lot of social equity, community equity. Insourcing covers a multitude of sins. Like reconstruction and rebuilding. As you know, a lot of rebuilding in New Orleans is done by volunteers and local people. Redesigning neighborhoods, local architects. Redoing commercial areas, facade treatments and things, breaking that down so local people could do it, and the outside firms might do some big jobs, but there's enough work for the locals. And that even stimulated some smaller businesses. Food was very important in New Orleans, so we got that going again. And making sure we get achievable housing. Everybody who wants to come back can come back. I'm going to race through these now. People can look back at this and see what they've done. Building higher communities. This is a community that's up on above the tides, above any kind of water damage, and there's grass there, play areas there, play structures there, and so forth. It can be done, and it's a nice community. Building on the platform. This is in New York City. Building on other platforms, turning all the yards together in the back rather than on common yards. And the economic development things that we did, changing the port. And the final thing is establish public-private partnerships for your future. Not just in insurance, but in everything you do. To use all your resources together to make sure you have a better future. And every community, if you look at the bottom of this, non-target areas have less money leverage than the target areas because money goes to certainty. It always goes to certainty. And the final lesson is making sure you really have everybody included. That's the biggest lesson from this. People were left out, kick and scream, and we don't get things done. And we got to know who we're doing this for. Thank you.
How about a hand for Mr. Blakely and Rob? Terrific program. Thank you, sir. We're going to move right into the next panel, which will be moderated by Professor Tony McDonald from Monmouth University. He's the director of the Urban Coast Institute, and prior to joining Monmouth, he was the executive director of the Coastal States Organization in our nation's capital.
we have one more panelist. We're waiting for Lopa. I didn't see her come in this morning, so hopefully, I don't know if she was coming up. I think, oh, I think she's trying to get her stuff together. So if Lopa would come up, we'll get this started. I guess I'll start the sort of my general sort of introductory remarks as we're waiting for Lopa to come up and join us. And I guess a couple of things for those of you who don't know. I'm Tony McDonald, the director of the Urban Coast Institute here at Monmouth University. And this is really an exciting event for us because it really brings together some things we've been working here at Monmouth and in partnership with almost everybody who's been on these panels and in this room. And we've been at Monmouth for 7 years now, and we really look at trying to bring the best science to the local level, to the regional level, to inform ocean and coastal management policy. So we have been working directly on issues having to do with ocean management and understanding our oceans and how that relates to weather and climate, and we partner with Rutgers and Stevens and many other institutions on that. We work very specifically with communities on adaptation issues, and sort of the new word, we were just sort of getting used to sustainability, and the word that keeps popping up in this context is resilience. And that's a word that, again, you're going to hear a lot, and you hear a lot in these issues, and I think it's important. We're hearing some of the themes about what resilience is, and I think this panel is really an excellent panel to build on some of Ed's observations about this coordinated multi-agency, multi-federal, state, local response. So resiliency is really something that is more than rebuilding, as we've heard. It really is about building better. It is more than reducing vulnerability. It also includes adaptation and looking into the future so we do bounce back. It's more than restoring jobs. It really is about envisioning what the mix of jobs is going to be in the future that's going to respond better to storms. So I really think this is a meaningful term and one that really has some specific applications. And I guess before I turn to the panel, and thanks, Lopa, for coming up. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you sooner. Thank you. I did want to mention that I do think sort of, for me, the crosscut here is community. That seems to be the word that I think works in every single context, whether we're talking about the science, the policy, or the management. And I think for me, it's the touchstone. Just coincidentally, I had sat down with Peter Kassenbach from New Jersey Future, with Peter from the Kislak Real Estate Institute and the Regional Plan Association, with Rob about a month before this storm, to talk about the fact that the coast is a special region that we did need to look at together. I didn't know we'd be coming together so quickly for such an important issue to work together, but these relationships have been established. One of the good news stories, I think, is there has been a lot of thinking about these issues. There has been a lot of science. Tony did a fantastic job in understanding some of these relationships, improvements in modeling, visualization. There has been a lot of work done, and we hear about it, I know, by FEMA and others, to think about rebuilding these communities. So we do have some lessons learned that we can bring to the table here in New Jersey and put into action. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers. Our first speaker today, and thank you for coming up from Washington, is Lopa Kalluri. And in her current role, she is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations and Strategy at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She is responsible for managing and coordinating HUD's program and policies in conjunction with the agency's budgeting, legislative, and external affairs division. And as many of you know, that Secretary of HUD, Sean Donovan, has actually been asked by the President to be the lead for the federal government in bringing together all these agencies and working with the states in this region. So we're really excited to have Lopa here. Most importantly, or as importantly, she also comes from New Jersey, so she really knows of what she speaks in concrete terms. Prior to joining HUD, she was the Vice President for Development at the Community Investment Strategies, a developer for affordable housing in New Jersey. With that, I'll turn it over to Lopa. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about HUD's efforts, and more importantly, the federal efforts to assist New Jersey in its recovery from the devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy. I'm pleased to be joined here by my colleagues from FEMA and the Army Corps, As many of you know, HUD's mission is to create strong and sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. Our current work as it relates to Sandy in New Jersey is really in support of the great efforts that FEMA has carried out thus far. We're working very closely with our colleagues in FEMA and other agencies, as well as state and local officials, to respond to the needs of the disaster-impacted families and communities. Our first priority is on the immediate recovery effects and recovery efforts, but doing it in a way, and you heard this theme throughout the morning, doing it in a way that really builds for a strong future. Before I took my position at HUD as Deputy Chief of Staff last year, I lived in New Jersey for over a decade. I called it home for 11 years. My husband grew up here. I raised my kids here so far. And so I have a personal connection to New Jersey, as well as a professional commitment to New Jersey. I've worked at state government, in the private sector, and the nonprofit sector during those 10 years. I think I may be returning to New Jersey, but we're not sure yet. We're going to actually do some really good work at federal level, and then we'll take it from there. Today I want to talk a little bit about how HUD has responded to Sandy and what we're doing to meet community needs. And I'm also going to talk about the broader role that Secretary Donovan is taking, that Tony alluded to, in really coordinating the long-term rebuilding efforts at the federal level. And Ed spoke about how challenging it was in Katrina and other disasters to deal with so many different federal agencies. And we're really drawing from the lessons learned from other disasters to really develop ways in which we can actually coordinate our efforts better at a federal level, and to structure it in a way that really is a process and a structure that we want to do. So I think it's really moving beyond sort of just saying that we're going to be coordinating, but really creating a structure to do that. So as you all know, and I don't have to tell you, the consequences from the storm were tremendous. Hundreds of thousands of residents, from our HUD perspective, we can see, have left their home, sought shelter from as far south as North Carolina to as far north as New Hampshire and as far west as Indiana, and especially hit hard, as we know, are New York and New Jersey. We also know that there's still power outages and families that need more permanent housing solutions, and we have a large team at HUD that are really working to meet the housing needs out there in the region. New Jersey and New York are critical economic engines of our nation, employing 12.7 million workers and accounting for 10% of US payroll employment. We as a region, New Jersey and New York, export about 90 billion in goods annually, accounting for 7% of such exports, and contributed 1.4 trillion to our domestic product in 2011, which accounts for 11% of GDP. So in the long term, a recovery and rebuilding has not only got to be a state and local priority, but a crucial national priority. Secretary Donovan has made 7 visits to the affected areas since the storm hit, including trips with the President, Secretary Napolitano, and Secretary Sebelius. We have seen firsthand the damage and spoken to state and local officials, and most importantly, to affected families about their needs. This is also very personal for the Secretary, who has deep roots not only in New York, but also in New Jersey, with his family residing in New Jersey and having worked in New Jersey for many years. HUD right now, as it stands today, since the storm, has deployed staff that's working across the state now in FEMA's disaster recovery centers. And we've joint field offices with FEMA, where we're in support of their response efforts to Sandy, working very closely with the Army Corps, as well as Health and Human Services, the Department of Transportation, and Small Business Administration. Our help has included providing local housing resource help, program information, getting help to storm victims, mobilizing special needs providers from other states to assist families in shelters, and participating on state-led disaster task forces in both New York and New Jersey, and really activating our Northeast fieldwork network of field offices to communicate daily with impacted housing agencies and families. A key HUD priority has been really providing immediate help to storm-displaced families to help find temporary replacement housing, whether they are displaced from private or government-assisted housing. We have identified thousands of housing units, including more than 12,000 units available in HUD-assisted housing, and have been getting that information out to displaced individuals. We are also allowing providers of housing, particularly for seniors, the flexibility to open up their vacant units to storm evacuees. As you may know, HUD primarily assists low-income and elderly and disabled members of the community, and so our response effort have been particularly focused on HUD-assisted properties as well as low-income individuals throughout New Jersey, as well as those also that may need assistance. We're in the process of currently assessing the state of our public and other HUD-assisted housing in New Jersey, and working to get folks and families back, working to get those buildings and houses back online. There are approximately 736 affected HUD-assisted properties in New Jersey, which is affecting about 67,000 units. There are about 292 families that are still evacuated, but we have rehoused 1,214 containers. So there's a team within HUD that's really in very much a response mode, and is working continually daily to respond to immediate needs on the ground for displaced families and other families that have been affected by the storm. The President has also told the Secretary that from the beginning, we need to do whatever it is that's necessary to cut through red tape and to help. For example, immediately after the storm, HUD staff worked to get generators to our multifamily buildings, to public housing buildings where a number of low-income residents reside, and so that they can get back into their homes quickly. Secretary has really taken this message to heart, even reaching out to Defense Secretary Leon Panetta to see about using military cargo plans to move generators in. So along these lines, we have also, in addition to some of the immediate recovery efforts and cutting through the red tape, we do have, as you all know, a number of programs at HUD, which range from, and if I had the time, I would love to spend the time to talk a lot about all of the various programs that HUD has, but I want to focus a little bit on some of the programs that we have allowed some flexibility in to meet the needs of those families that have been affected by the disaster. HUD's Federal Housing Administration, FHA, has issued immediate foreclosure relief by granting 90-day moratoriums on foreclosures and forbearances on foreclosures on FHA loans. We know that there are about 182,000 families residents in New Jersey with FHA loans that actually could conceivably benefit from that regulatory change. We're also offering 2 post-disaster mortgage programs under our Section 203. Loans will enable home buyers and homeowners to refinance both the purchase and refinancing of their house and the cost of its rehabilitation into a single mortgage. So it really allows homeowners who have damaged houses to finance the rehabilitation of their existing single-family home. And the program encourages lenders to make these mortgages available to borrowers who would not otherwise qualify for conventional loans on affordable terms. Especially in those neighborhoods that have been disadvantaged. HUD also has a special mortgage insurance program under the Section 203 of the National Housing Act to assist displaced residents. Under this program, individuals or families whose residences were destroyed or damaged to such an extent that reconstruction and replacement is necessary are also eligible for 100% financing. So what we've been able to do is really bring to bear some of the programs that we have and that we actually deployed during Katrina. We've been able to look at a lot of our regulations and rules to figure out what kind of flexibility we can bring to families that have been displaced or to families that have been affected by Sandy. We have also provided waivers of rules for our Community Development Block Grant Program and for our Home Funds Program that are going to be used for disaster relief. So collectively, CDBG and HOME, as many of you know, are programs that allow grantees to provide a broad range of needs, including housing and economic development and infrastructure and the provision of public services And so really having that flexibility to be able to look at your programs and look at the individuals and families in your community, and being able to come back and really adjust those programs to meet the changed needs of your communities is I think, really important. On Tuesday, we gave our public housing authorities the flexibility in calculating their rent payments who are experiencing, in areas that are experiencing increasing demand for rental housing, so we're actually allowing the PHAs to calculate the rents up to 120% of the fair market, and thereby giving low-income families and other families really options to find housing in other higher income and tighter markets. This past Wednesday, the Secretary testified on the Hill about the response efforts and the need for supplemental funding. Secretary Donovan and the administration are continuing to work with Congress, the governors, and mayors to refine what those numbers would be that would actually go into the supplemental. And we are right now in the process of finalizing those numbers, and those numbers are going to be sent to Congress, we're hoping today, but if not, early next week. We're hoping that Congress will act quickly to move this piece of legislation so that we can make money and funding available for disaster assistance for Sandy throughout the region. As HUD moves beyond some of the immediate response need, we'll keep involved in continuing to support the housing needs of individuals and families that are affected by Sandy. We'll look to, one, support the rehousing, HUD-assisted families, and looking to expedite repairs. And that means assisting state and local partners so that they can track down some of the families that are displaced by disaster and work to permanently rehouse those families. We need to, and this is a theme that keeps coming back this morning, and I want to reiterate it again, we need to balance moving families into housing quickly, but also looking how we can rebuild better and smarter. Our efforts are also going to support the need, and will support rebuilding the general housing stock better and stronger. We're going to be working with state and local partners as they develop strategies to rebuild the general housing stock, and a housing stock that reflects the housing needs of affected communities and also helps to reduce risk and increase sustainability. We're also looking, as HUD does as part of their programs, to provide technical assistance to help state and local capacity, to help build state and local capacity to support really long-term building. And so we'll be focused on identifying technical resources, HUD resources, and other resources to really help the long-term building process. I keep mentioning the long-term building process, and that's something that will begin to move in fairly quickly. And I mentioned that Secretary Donovan is taking a broader role, and I want to talk a little bit about that. On November 15th, the President announced that Secretary Donovan would lead a coordination of federal action related to Hurricane Sandy's rebuilding efforts. And this really stems from the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which was finalized in 2011, which was really developed out of the lessons learned from Katrina and other disasters to increase federal collaboration across agencies, and how the federal government, not just FEMA, not just HUD, not just DOT, but the federal government works with state and local government and communities. So we're currently working on a structure and process for this, and please expect to hear more about specifics on this in the coming weeks, if not days. We're really excited about this broader role, and please be on the lookout, because there'll be more details that'll be coming to talk about this broader federal coordinated effort. So as the continued response effort will continue to be a coordinated effort, but as Ed was saying, it's often challenging because we aren't set up to operate as a family, a federal family. Although we are a federal family, we have our own programs, and so we're still in a position where FEMA is first in line, trying to provide that immediate response, and then we're joining, trying to operate hand in step with FEMA. And the Army Corps, several other members of the federal family, to really align our missions and therefore align our programs in the field. And during an immediate during the disaster, it's often a challenge because all the agencies want to move very quickly, and we've got to figure out how to coordinate that effectively. And I realize from a community perspective or from a local government perspective that may not look like or may not be the most effective way to do it. So that's why I'm very excited about for the long-term rebuilding efforts for this region. We are really focused on building a broader, more coordinated effort to bring the federal resources to bear in New Jersey, as well as New York and the other parts of the region. As part of this effort, the long-term recovery plan will be to address housing, not just housing, infrastructure systems, small business, local industry, health systems, and social and cultural resources. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about the federal government's efforts and what we may bring to bear here. I've been in the communities in New Jersey, working in the communities for the last decade. I've been at the state government, and the federal government has always been such a mystery. And you know, in times of non-crisis, it's, you know, we spend time as developers, as practitioners, as policymakers, trying to make all the various programs work. But it's times like these that we really don't need the federal government to be thinking as one agency, but to be thinking as one family. And so the hope and the plan is to do that. And I look forward to working much more closely with many of you in the coming weeks and coming months. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lopa, and to build on a theme that Ed suggested too, you know, we think of this as the beginning of an ongoing set of overlapping collaborative efforts on this. You know, we really do look forward, hopefully, to seeing you back, but also the Secretary and the other federal agencies. You know, we've been in touch with others. NOAA, that we can't put everybody on the panel, but we're working closely with NOAA. Lisa Jackson is a former New Jersey person, certainly. So we have a lot of collaborators and friends, and we look forward to following up with you and finding opportunities to further both coordinate and collaborate on moving forward. Our next speaker is Charlie Chestnut. He is a coastal engineer at the Institute for Water Resources and has 40 years of experience at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, including working on coastal processes and being a special advisor to the Coastal Engineering Research Board. He's worked on other activities for the Corps in relations to hurricane evacuation studies and including jointly with FEMA and the National Weather Service. I've also had the privilege of partnering with Charlie on several initiatives. He's actually been a really policy visionary, pushing issues and considerations in New Jersey about thinking about more regional approaches to sediment management, thinking about understanding the systems along the shoreline, not only in terms of Corps of Engineers projects, but in terms of what we do long-term to reduce risk. So we really appreciate Charlie joining us today and sharing us some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm here representing Colonel Savray, who is the commander of the North Atlantic Division, headquartered in Brooklyn. That consists of 5 district offices, most importantly to this group, the district in New York and the district in Philadelphia. While I'm sitting at headquarters, I'm here providing a regional representation. I wanted to start out talking about what we do and try to recharacterize what we do. And that you and we tend to think of ourselves as just building infrastructure. But that infrastructure serves some very important purposes, and it connects with the economy in a variety of ways. Most importantly, we have a flood risk management or flood control mission that includes our shore protection, beach nourishment mission, and the idea there is to protect components of the economy. We also, our largest mission is the navigation mission, building waterways and harbors that move the economy. And since we're so dependent upon imports for what we consume and exports for what we do as a living, having that and 90% of our goods move through our harbors and ports, that's a huge part of our economy, and we have a modest but significant role in making that happen. We're also mindful of the environment, and we have an aquatic ecosystem restoration mission that makes sure that we do the economic things in full cognizance of the importance of the environment to a sustainable economy. We have an emergency response mission in two forms. One, we support FEMA with the emergency support system, and we also have emergency response for our own projects. We also have another way in which we connect with the economy, and that's, I guess, through derivatives from our projects. We sell hydropower from our dams. We sell water supply from our reservoirs, and then we contribute tourism destinations through both our reservoir projects and as well as our shore protection projects on the coast. So we've got a strong connection to the economy, and that's what I want to talk about here today. So what have we done during Sandy? Well, we've done our immediate response in support of FEMA and the federal family. We continue to be involved in that. And as that moves into the national disaster recovery process, we're a component of that. We're also looking at our own projects. We've done an immediate assessment of how well our projects survive the event, and how well they perform their function. And we can say qualitatively, and the press has done this for us, that where we had a strong project in place with a good high dune system and a beach, wide beach in front of it, we protected a lot of public and private infrastructure, not just the homes, but the roads and facilities within those communities. We're looking at, and we've already begun the assessment process of what needs to be done to get those projects back up to their pre-storm condition, because that gets one kind of funding, and then what needs to be done to get them up to their original design capacity. That requires a different kind of federal funding just within the Corps' vernacular. So we have our challenges there. But we're looking at what are the needs. I believe the number is 19 projects that will need some degree of consideration for emergency response, and then all of them will look at what do we need to get them back up to full strength. The importance of New Jersey here, and this is of significance, I think. Our business of shore protection started in New Jersey. It was the development of the shore in New Jersey that led to challenges from the sea on that development, and the state identified that they needed help. They came to Congress, and Congress said, all right, we'll get the Corps of Engineers involved in helping develop the discipline for how we do protect coastal communities. And that's what led to the part of the Corps' business that I'm in. And we've been working with folks in New Jersey and in the Mid-Atlantic region for some time on how do we do this better. Do we have my slides? Okay. Okay. All right. This is just a quick overview. You can't read it up there, but you can see the extent of where we have projects in New Jersey. And that's on its way to becoming a system. We started out building them one at a time. The challenge now is how do we manage them as a system of projects. This shows our projects on Long Island and around New York, and this adds Delaware. As we begin to look at how do we manage these as a system, then we've got to start looking at the broader family. It's not just the communities within New Jersey, it's the community of the Mid-Atlantic, which consists of New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. All of those states have a robust development of their coastal zone. We are engaged in many areas with you, and we've got to find the better way to manage this business as we move ahead. But some of the outcomes of this event point out to what the challenge of that's going to be. Where we had projects, we provided significant protection to the communities and the infrastructure behind them. Where we didn't have projects, you experienced some fairly significant losses, some of them total. We're trying to become concerned about the whole coast, not just the place where we have projects. And I'm not promising in any way, I can't put words in neither the president's or the Congress's mouth, and I'm not trying to, but we got to be concerned about the whole coast, which says we've got to work with a number of governmental partners, and we've got to work with a broader set of financiers for how we're going to do this. In observation, we can't be managing projects one appropriations bill at a time. And we certainly can't manage them one emergency supplemental at a time. That doesn't lead to good, consistent, systematic management of the economy. And that's what we're about. And we're not just about, as we look at restoring our projects, it's not just about how do we rebuild the beaches, it's how do we rebuild the economy. Now, we're not in charge of the economy of New Jersey, but we certainly have things that contribute significantly to the state's ability to have a tourism economy. Now, how are we going to do this? We've already been in extensive discussions with both FEMA and NOAA on how do we bring together the federal interests on how to rebuild a resilient coast, and recognizing that that also is tied up with, or really leads to, not just how do we create a resilient community, but how do we create a resilient economy. And so as we rebuild components of the economy, let's think about how do we make each of those components more resilient. And that means, I think, recognizing that they're all part of multiple systems, and how do we make each of those systems resilient. But part of making the whole system resilient is to make sure that everybody's component is resilient. We've got to find ways to connect the areas between our projects to provide some degree of protection, financed by whatever means, to protect the whole coast, not just where we have projects. I'll stop there, and we'll pursue questions after that.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Our last speaker on this panel is, and it's fitting because I don't know how he found time out of his schedule, FEMA folks have been really fantastic in responding. So I really appreciate all the work that you and everybody else is doing right now. Tim Crowley is the Region 2 Director for Mitigation for FEMA. He oversees all disaster mitigation efforts, from the development and publication of new flood maps to grants designed to help communities curtail the effects of future disasters. He's an engineer and a lawyer. kind of funny combination, but but also has deep roots in New Jersey again. So we're very fortunate that Tim, prior to joining FEMA, was also a Deputy Attorney General Counsel and Counsel to the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. So I don't think there's anybody better to talk to us about how to look forward to building a new normal and responding to that than Tim Crowley. Thanks.
Oh, there we go. I asked for slides, I haven't. Good morning, everyone, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come to talk to you, to have a conversation about we collectively. When I mean collectively, I mean everyone from the federal government to the state government to local government and to the residents of New Jersey on how we're going to build back stronger, safer, and more resilient New Jersey. And that's really what it is. It's about a conversation. Can I get the slides to work? Okay, so this is basically some of the topics I'm going to talk about, but if you take away anything from what we're going to talk about in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'd ask you to focus on three things. Advisory-based flood elevations, and I'll talk a little about them because that is going to be the risk identification for you as you move forward. But more importantly, community resilience, and you've heard everybody talk about it. That's really where we're driving to collectively, is community resilience. And if you take away one thing from my talk up here, it's this important thing. This is all about community-based informed decision-making. We are not, the federal government is not the decision maker. The state is not the decision maker. It is the communities who are the decision makers. And that makes absolute sense because communities know their communities better than anyone else. So as they make informed decisions on how they move forward, they have to be an integral part and the leading part of that. We are committed to this effort. In fact, it is on our mission statement. If you look at our mission statement up there, you'll see it is to work together to build a stronger community to withstand future disasters. And when I focus on the mitigation division particularly, which will be what I'm focusing on, our mission is even more defined. It is working in partnership with all our partners, but particularly communities, to build disaster resilient communities. And partnership is the key word in that. When you talk about our vision is a nation committed to disaster resiliency. And I do this all the time, so I'll embarrass you. This is my test for the thing. How many people, as we sit here today, think we are a nation committed to disaster resiliency? I'm actually getting a hand because usually we get no hands. Now, let me ask the second question, and the people who have taken this test before can answer. How many think that as a result, last year we were talking about Irene, this year we're talking about Sandy. How many people think we as a nation, and particularly we as a state, the state of New Jersey, have an opportunity to focus on disaster resiliency while it's close in there? And I would hope that everyone's hands goes up. So we have to seize the day. Carpe diem, I believe, is the word. Seize the day to work with the communities to build a disaster resiliency community. So how do we do that? And you've heard that Dr. Blakely talked about it, Ms. Kalori talked about it. It's how do we get there? We get there in partnership, working as a term we use, whole of community. And that means different things to a lot of people, but it really means working to collectively across all the families to get to that end goal. And as you heard, there's a mechanism in place and a framework in place. And in Jersey and New York is going to be the first time we really effectively use that. And that is what you've heard called the NDRF, the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And what is that? It's just not about rebuilding that firehouse or rebuilding that house or repairing that road. It's looking at all the aspects of what makes a community a community. The social aspects, the environmental aspects, the economic aspects, the housing aspects, everything that makes that community what it is, that makes those Jersey Shore communities so special, and looking at it across that way to come to an ultimate solution. you know, as we focus on how are we going to repair the beaches, how are we going to repair the dunes, how are we going to repair the boardwalks, how are we going to prepare the infrastructure. It's things like looking at it holistically. Is there an opportunity for wetlands expansion or lagoons or other environmental matters that may help in that rebuilding? So that's how we're going to look at that. I'm going to focus on the mitigation part of that because I'm the mitigation director, and quite frankly, we believe that mitigation is the foundation of that NDRF. Because if you can't address, in this case, the flooding concerns, the issues with the national disaster, you can't get to those other aspects. So mitigation is really the foundation. Look at how we mitigate against further risk. And what is mitigation? Mitigation is taking action now, which is going to reduce the risk and the results of a further disaster. It's taking it now, not after. It's incorporating methods that prevent future damage so that you have a community that is long-lasting, disaster resiliency, or sustainable. So here's the takeaway: community-informed decision-making. Because quite frankly, if I polled you, all communities are different. Even the communities along the shore are different. It's not a cookie-cutter approach. It's one approach doesn't fit all of them. Communities have to really make those decisions. And we can help in those decisions. There's, as I talked about, advisory flood elevation that we're going to talk about. We have some building science information, floodplain management and insurance, a truly local endeavor that can really help communities build back stronger and better, mitigation planning, and community outreach. And just to touch on some of those, and I'll talk about ABF in a couple of slides, but in terms of floodplain management, you are fortunate in New Jersey that our base flood elevations, which are the minimum federal requirements, New Jersey has added a 2-foot freeboard. So in New Jersey, you need to build 2 feet above the freeboard. That's good. Looking to use freeboard as a way to help, increase the resiliency of a house, of a business, of a boardwalk. So things like that. It's the community rating system, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the community rating system. That is, as a community takes action to reduce their risk, they get points. And there's 2 beneficial effects of getting those points. One is you've made your community safer and more resilient, and 2, you've reduced the cost of insurance to your residents in that community. And fortunately, New Jersey, and particularly the shore communities, there are several communities on the shore who are very active in CRS and have reaped the benefits of that CRS participation. Mitigation planning. Every single community in New Jersey, be it either a local community or a county, has a mitigation plan. How many people have seen their mitigation plan for their community? Okay, it's some. Most time it sits right next to the economic development plan and the housing plan, but it is a key plan. Why? Because it identifies those risks particular to your community. And more importantly, it identifies those mitigation measures that you can take as a community to reduce that risk. So mitigation is really the foundation of the mitigation plan. So look at your mitigation plan. During the course of responding to this disaster, we're going to be looking at all those mitigation plans again and focusing on methods that can help you become more disaster resilient. And last but not least, community outreach, because we can all have discussions here. The federal family can have discussions. We have discussions with the state. We'll have discussions with local communities. But unless you have a community engagement, and by community engagement I mean everyone, for the residents involved in the process, you're not going to be successful. So how do we work on community engagement and outreach, getting the word out to people about how they can take methods to be more resilient? I'll use one example. As many of you may know, we are actually in the process of redoing the maps for the Jersey coast. One of the things we do in that is a thing we call COAT, which is the Coastal Outreach Advisory Team. And who is that? That's everyday citizens, it's academia, it's people from the local officials who get together, and as we talk about outreach with communities, we say to them, does this make sense? Will this resonate with your community? Because if it doesn't, we shouldn't be having those conversations. And what resonates in Cape May not resonate in Monmouth County. It may not. But that's the kind of example of an outreach that really works to get to the communities. On an everyday basis, we work with communities to identify their risk. And most of that is mapping, and it is the mitigation planning. And as I said, we are in the process of remapping the entire coast of New Jersey and New York City and parts of New York State. As many of you may know, the maps that are currently in effect in New Jersey, some are from the 70s, some are from the early 80s, they quite frankly do not reflect the risk that is present today. And as you listen to Tony Broccoli talk about, they certainly don't reflect the risk for today. They took in storm surge, but the technology and the science of storm surge has so advanced since that time that we needed to do storm surge. More importantly, it didn't consider wave height and the destructive force that waves cause on buildings. Unfortunately, those maps are still about a year and a half away. So how do we help communities decide, because they are making rebuilding decisions today as we speak. How do we help them decide what's the proper way to build? What's the base flood elevation that they need to build above? And that's what advisory base flood elevations are. They are the best data. So actually even before Sandy hit, but when we knew there was going to be an impact to the Jersey coast in New York, our engineers and our scientists started to work on taking the data that had already been developed in the mapping process as far along as it was, and adding a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of science, a whole bunch of engineering to get to these advisory base flood elevations, so that communities have the best data that depicts their risk. So how do property owners benefit from this? They benefit really in two ways, but one really is more important. To build to the advisory base flood elevations will make them safer, because it is the risk. It's the difference of that wave flowing under the house because you're up on pylons and above the ABFEs, or that wave crashing into your first floor and taking out the entire first floor. That's the simplest example of how ABFEs can help not only residents but businesses withstand what will be the next event. The other part of ABFEs is, as many of you are aware, there is a zone, there is a coastal high hazard zone, which most of the barrier islands are part of, and then a regular flood hazard zone. The coastal barrier zone has very high risk. It comes with particular requirements, elevation being one of them. Examples, breakaway basement walls is one, or a flow through is another. So that line may in fact move a little bit inward on some of those islands and requiring a higher standard. So we're getting that information out. In fact, in New Jersey, that information will be out in the next couple of weeks, so the communities can look at this, say, as I look to rebuild, as I look to elevate, as I look to how am I going to ensure that these structures that I need to look at are going to be rebuilt stronger, they will have that data and be able to act on that data. So we've identified the risk. What do we do now? And that's where risk reduction comes in, and how are we collectively going to reduce that risk? And there's a laundry list of things, and I'll give you some of those, but that's not to suggest that that's the entire list. That's why the mitigation planning and the community-informed decision-making is so important, because the community knows how they can reduce the risk. But it should be proactive. As I said, let's address the risk now. Let's take the opportunity now as we rebuild from the devastation of Sandy to build back stronger, so if a Sandy-like storm comes, next year or 2 years from now, those effects will be less. And it can be simple things like adding vents to enclosures, installing breakaway walls, moving structures away from the hazard. You will hear stories that in Mississippi, a term which they coined rescission from the coast, and that's really just a fancy term for moving houses away from the coast. Now, quite frankly, as we have discussions, is that an option in New Jersey? The reason people are on the coast is because they're on the coast. So moving them to Hamilton, not to pick on Hamilton, is not where they want their shore house. So, you know, but for some people, they may look to do that. But it's talking about freeboard is key, and engaging in that mitigation element. All of this has two benefits, really. One is it makes that property, those residents, safer, not only from the physical effects, but as I'm sure you all know, there are economic and psychological effects from flooding. We've had conversations with residents in the Passaic River, who have flooded 5 times or 4 times in the last 5 years, who have said, I can't do this anymore. It's not the rebuilding, it's the economic strain, it's the psychological strain, it's the strain that I know this is coming again next year. I can't do this anymore. So there's more than just the rebuilding. To make them safer, to give them some comfort in that it won't be as bad the next time is key. And it will make them eligible, the community eligible for some additional FEMA benefits and lower the insurance risk. So I don't have to cover the situation we did already. It's catastrophic. Those numbers will only go up. I think Jennifer talked about the estimate on housing. 122,000 structures have been touched. 429 of them are destroyed, and about 27,000 have suffered major damage. That, unfortunately, I think is one of the results of living in the most densely populated state. And money will continue. So I'll conclude with this. The third point I wanted to take, community resiliency. We're going to provide you with the best available data. Community officials should look to adopt those higher standards and should use them as they make decisions on how they're going to rebuild forward. Everyone, and that means everyone, from the residents all the way up through you know, the mayor, the community, the county, the state, the governor, and the federal government. Everyone takes mitigation action, and together we can create a stronger and safer community that's better equipped to face the next storm, which we know is coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and just very happy that Monmouth just signed an agreement with the New Jersey DEP to be part of your coastal ocean outreach and advance team. So we're very happy that we have that in place, and we've got a work plan, and we're moving out on that, and we have more to do. So I don't know about you, but I am very confident of being in the hands of some of these folks and others, and I think we owe them a debt of gratitude, but also look forward to working with them in the future. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry we don't have time. There was one project question that maybe Charlie can answer afterwards, but with that, I think we do need to move it on to the next panel, so I'll turn it back over to the Peters. Thank you very much, everybody. Great. Thank you. Excellent.
The word of the day is resilience, and I will commend everyone that has stayed throughout the whole thing for your resilience. These chairs are comfortable, right? Our final panel brings us back home to New Jersey, what's going on, and it'll be moderated by Peter Kasabak, who is the Executive Director of New Jersey Future. And prior to joining New Jersey Future, he was the Chief of Policy and Community Development for the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency, and he'll introduce the panel.
Have our panelists come on up and join us. Brian, are you out there somewhere? Wow, it's very blinding up here, isn't it? Oh, there we go. All right. Feel free to give a big stretch if you need it. I know I certainly did. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you all again for joining us today, especially as we wrestle with the new realities regarding how vulnerable many of our communities are to sea level rise and weather-related events. I don't know how many people may have seen the new or heard about the new World Bank report that came out today, saying just bringing more emphasis to this issue, that this is the new normal, and the new normal may be even worse than we think it is. As Peter said, my name is Peter Kasabak. I'm the Executive Director of New Jersey Future. New Jersey Future is an independent, statewide nonprofit organization that promotes smarter growth in New Jersey. Our mission recognizes that how we use our land matters in many different ways that we often take for granted. Our goal is to improve our land use decisions that in turn will improve our economy, protect our environment, and produce fair outcomes for all of our citizens. We accomplish our mission by doing independent research, convening stakeholders from all sides of an issue, including public and private sector interests, and then advocating for investment, regulatory, and policy changes that will make New Jersey a better place for all of us, not just for our future, but for our children's future. It was a great picture that Ed had, and hopefully helps remind us why we're doing a lot of this. And if you have any questions about New Jersey Future, you can go to our website or talk to any one of our staff who are here today, Chris Sturm, Elaine Clisham, or Marianne Jan. You can also join us on March 1st for our annual redevelopment forum that we hold in New Brunswick, where we'll talk about a number of these issues, but issues regarding redevelopment in general. The next and last session of the day is titled Opportunities for State and Regional Action. Right now, we have a historic opportunity to not just rebuild, but to learn lessons from other parts of the country and world about what rebuilding better would look like. In some cases, it will mean building our buildings differently. In other cases, it will mean protecting our communities better with natural and man-made systems. And in other cases, it will mean giving Mother Nature a little more space so we can stay out of harm's way. We're very lucky to be joined today by two experts who will cover this issue from different but complementary viewpoints. First up is Mark Moriello. Mark is the former commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and he knows his way around the department, having started there in the mid-1980s. His expertise is vast and deep and includes the areas of land use regulation, coastal processes, natural hazard management and mitigation, shoreline management and protection, floodplain management, stormwater management, natural resource protection, and ecological sustainability. So if you have any questions on just about anything, you can ask Mark afterwards. Mark is currently the Director of Environmental Affairs and Planning for Edgewood Properties of Piscataway, a developer of real estate across the country. Mark?
Well, good morning. Actually, Peter was 1980. Don't shortchange me on those extra years. So it's been a great program today. My remarks are really informed by my experience not only at DEP, but as Megan indicated, she was lucky enough to have a family house at the beach. I was as well in the borough of Lavallette since 1957. And I'd also just like to say that I did not collaborate on preparing these remarks with Tim Crowley. When I finish the talk, you'll understand why I'm saying that. But there are a lot of themes that will continue to play through today from a number of the same ways. All right, how does this thing work here, Pete? Okay. Thank you. So I want to just quickly go through a few facts, things that we know, and we know it because we have a lot of smart people in this state who've been studying climate, who've been studying geology, geomorphology, and processes. We heard from Tony earlier, his work related to climate. We know that sea level is rising. We have tide gauges in the state, in Atlantic City and Sandy Hook, that have been measuring these tide heights for over 100 years. We know that sediment supplies are diminishing. We certainly have a fair share of development and impervious cover that continues to impact our environment and increase the hazards. We know that flood hazard areas are expanding. Tim touched on that. We know that flood heights are increasing. Extreme weather seems to be occurring more frequently. We know that you take a look around the state, particularly these most vulnerable coastal areas, and you look at the high density of people and property at risk. We also have traditionally underestimated the hazards, and it's a function of changing hazards and trying to map and study and produce information, and by the time it gets out there, the conditions have changed to the point where we tend to underestimate these hazards. We know that the standards that we apply to construction are insufficient to protect people, and it's evidenced by the post-storm damage surveys that are conducted that demonstrate that we're just not building resilient communities the way that we could and we should. And lastly, and this is not a knock, I'm certainly part of this conundrum of agencies. There are so many agencies doing so much good work, but they have primary missions. And what I've found over a long career is that it's very difficult for the agencies to really coordinate their planning activities between the agencies so that we make sure that we're maximizing the outcomes of all that good work. So we know that we have a warming trend. The climate science is pretty clear on that. I won't belabor this point. It was touched on earlier, but the importance of the science is that it informs what we see on the ground. It informs our knowledge of processes and hazards and vulnerability. We heard about the sea level rise scenario, global warming, thermal expansion being a big part of that. We use the term relative sea level rise because it's a combination of seas rising in response to melting ice caps and thermal expansion, as well as it is from land subsidence. So you get a relative change along the coast. We know very clearly that the floodplains are changing, not just in New Jersey, but throughout the country. Over time, floodplains expand, flood heights increase, and the problem is that if you build to a standard that doesn't account for future conditions, you wind up with development that is vulnerable in the future. So with that knowledge, we can apply things that we heard about in terms of freeboard and other types of development programs that will account for that and help result in these more resilient communities. We have a problem in the state with a static development line and a negative sediment budget. And when I studied with Dr. Sudi at Rutgers many years ago, this is something he impressed on his students, that you have to have a good understanding of sediment budgets and transport in order to look at shoreline processes and responses. That's why the Corps is so active with their beach nourishment program with the state of New Jersey. We just don't have the sediment supplies to naturally nourish our beaches. We've got a static development line. This is a shot about a week ago from Holgate, and I'm standing on the top of a berm that was bulldozed, what was formerly a dune, looking west into a salt marsh, and you can see the car in the front. That's Long Beach Boulevard, again, the southern end of Long Beach Island, and that extensive deposit of sand is an overwash fan. That area starting at the road was a salt marsh about 5 weeks ago, literally right up to Long Beach Boulevard. This is an overwash fan about 4 to 5 feet thick of sand that was brought over as the ocean breached the dune and washed across the island. This illustrates the natural process that is trying to occur in New Jersey but isn't able to occur. This is how barrier islands migrate and have for thousands of years, but we have a problem in that we have a static development line and we're not allowing that to occur. I'm not suggesting that we can or should everywhere, but when I see something like this in a vulnerable area, you know, maybe there is an opportunity to focus some buyouts and allow for this area that does support homes to become a new dune zone to protect that main road off the island. We have the issue of our construction standards that I cited earlier, which are not sufficient to protect the buildings and the people. These shots from about a week ago in Toms River Township, Ortley Beach section, and Brick Township show what happens when you build houses that are not able to withstand the hazards that they're subject to. And these are a few snapshots of things that have occurred up and down the coast: Union Beach, Keyport, Normandy Beach, Mantoloking. There are too many slides to show, so I'm just pointing a few of the highlights out for you here. Another Driftwood Cabana Club, another example if you've been up through Seabright and Monmouth Beach. These structures clearly not built for that location and clearly shouldn't be there. I'm not blaming anybody because I guess I was part of the problem being at DEP, but I'd also like to think that I can be part of a solution at this point. The single family home in Seabright or Monmouth Beach, you can see a high water mark about 4 feet up on that door. This isn't in a wave impact zone, but it's an area that gets flooded from the back and the front between the river and the ocean, and clearly this house is not sustainable. There's another slide of something that we really are starting to pay more attention to is how you have velocity forces in areas that are not directly on the ocean front. This is a slide from Seaside Park. It's very indicative of what happened along the Raritan Bay shore, where the storm surge pushed the water elevations up in the bays. And then when these storms, whether it's a hurricane or a northeaster, when they move through the state, the winds shift usually to a westerly direction, and all that water that's piled up all of a sudden comes raging into the island from the backside. This is storm surge wave-driven damage on the bay in Seaside Park, and folks really were surprised to see that. They're used to flooding, they're used to seeing the storm sewers back up, but when you have impact to structures from bay surges, you know that we really need to broaden our thinking about how we manage development in these areas. We have challenges in the urban areas, and whether it's Middlesex County, Woodbridge, Sayreville, up through the really densely developed areas of Jersey City and Hoboken and Newark, a major problem. You see emergency service vehicles can't get through. There were hundreds of residents stranded in their homes in Hoboken. I have family in Hoboken who are without power for 2 weeks, 2 feet of water in their house. I had to go up to bring them food because they couldn't get out. The stores were closed, the ATMs were shut down. It's a kind of a scary wake-up call in showing us the problems we have, but certainly there are some solutions that we can bring to bear. The magnitude of the problem and the costs for the state, not just New Jersey, but all the affected areas, is sort of illustrated in these slides here when you think of just the debris generated from the devastation of the storm. If you go through these impacted communities, you'll see this site everywhere. These are municipal stockpiles where all this debris is being deposited and sorted out by these crews that are working pretty much nonstop. And what you see is three or four different types of piles. You see in the Long Branch slide, there's a pile of vegetation. It's trees and shrubs. It's that dark pile. The pile behind it is sort of the everything pile. It's furniture, mattresses, sheetrock, you name it. On the right is the Funtown Pier remains in Seaside Height, timber. So the towns not only have to collect this debris from the streets, they have to stockpile it, they have to sort it, dispose of it. There are piles of appliances being sorted out, presumably for salvage. But the DEP testified this week at the Senate Budget and Appropriation Committee hearings that they estimate 6.2 million cubic yards of debris to manage. Just figure out that volume and the costs, and you can understand why these estimates are so high. We have some problems with our oceanfront infrastructure, and this is an example from Belmar, which is a great town, typical Jersey town with a boardwalk, and Dr. Blakely talked about going out, and where he saw environmental barriers, dunes or wetlands, he saw less damage. And conversely, where you don't see those barriers, you see more damage. Belmar just voted Monday to approve $20 million to repair the boardwalk. Belmar didn't have a dune in front of that boardwalk, nor did Avon and a number of other communities. Hopefully, this lesson learned, and with these kind of damage costs involved, there will be some change in thinking about how important it would be to have a natural protection in front of that boardwalk. Where we saw healthy dunes in front of boardwalks, there was much less damage. If you go down into Seaside Park, for example, you see a very eroded dune, but you see a boardwalk that's still there, the gazebos are still there. So we have these successes in New Jersey. We don't have to wonder, can we do it or where it's been done. It's been done right here. In terms of financial implications, beyond just the disaster relief you hear about now, which is the Stafford Act, the disaster recovery assistance to cover debris management and reconstruction of public infrastructure, tremendous exposure under the National Flood Insurance Program. And our speaker, Megan, earlier touched on new mechanisms to address that, because ultimately it's going to bankrupt the NFIP, and the debt to the Treasury is just going to increase over time. Here's a slide with statistical probabilities, which is 10 years old. I'm curious to know if these numbers will change, but the important numbers are in red, where you see the likelihood of a 100-year, or what we call 1% annual chance storm. There's a 26% chance that a homeowner will experience that in a 30-year period. And the significance of the 30 years is a typical life of a mortgage. There's a 50% chance in a 70-year period, and the 70-year period represents a typical lifetime of a structure. So when you look at those odds, we shouldn't be too surprised that people are being impacted by these 1% storms, which are going to get more severe. I'm going to go, all right, here we go. So what is our goal? It's the point and theme of this conference, disaster resilience. The important thing is, will we learn from our experiences to do things differently? And we've made great progress over the past 30 years. It's been incremental. It's always looked at as never enough, but I'm a big fan of looking at small successes and building on that. But the key is learning from these experiences to change how we manage our land for the long-term sustainability. And we can't look at the next year or the next 5 years. We have a short-term view, and it's sort of a human nature to think short-term. We really need to look at more long-term in order to set ourselves up for a more sustainable future. So then this is where you're going to say, I know this guy talked to Crowley before he wrote these remarks, but how do we get there? The resilience can be accomplished through hazard mitigation. Again, I've identified some basic tools here: comprehensive planning, acquisition, relocation, standards, regulation, land use. I'll go through these in just a little detail to give you some examples of how that can be done. Multi-hazards planning, looking at the range of hazards that communities face, whether it's flood, whether it's wave, whether it's wind, is it erosion, and identify all the options. Don't just look at a hazard and say, well, we're going to have to nourish a beach, and that's the end of it. There is no one solution. We don't do a good enough job of having pre-storm plans in place, and the result of that is we experience a storm, and then this chaos reigns, and folks are asking, what should we be doing? We should know what we should be doing before the event occurs, and it only happens through good, comprehensive planning. We need to ensure, we heard about agencies cooperating, we need to be sure that as the agencies are doing their primary mission, that they're interacting in a way that maximizes the outcome of all those actions and all those dollars that are brought to bear. And again, we have to look at long-term cost-beneficial solutions. Many times we do things that are a quick fix, and then we find that in the long term, we've really not spent that money well. And with the budgets being the way they are, we really need to change that thought. Looking at the broad range of solutions, community rating system, which was mentioned earlier, and involves a significant outreach component. Residents in these areas don't have a great understanding of the hazards and the vulnerability. And if they don't understand it, they're not going to be able to appreciate what they can do to change it. So it's very important that that component is really focused on as part of an overall plan. Acquisition and relocation, it's a really hot button item. And often you get into a situation where the debate gets polarized. People say we should retreat from the shore, or people say we should hold the line everywhere. And I guess my point is there's a middle ground where we hold the line and maybe we do pull back in some areas. But we can't let the debate be polarized to those extremes. We do know that when you acquire and relocate property, that problem, it won't recur. And you can look at the Passaic Basin, very successful program to buy properties, and those problems don't exist. You can look at New Jersey examples on the coast, if you're old enough to look back at what happened after the '62 storm. And Sea Isle City at that time condemned an entire 2 blocks of property on the beach that had been wiped out by a storm. But the key was that the mayor at the time, Mayor Raffa, instituted a program of providing lots for these homeowners on the backside of the city. Now, it's easier said than done, because here we are in 50 years later, and we don't have the luxury of a lot of properties, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. So when people say we can't do it at the coast, I would challenge them that we actually could. The other advantage of this pullback is that we provide opportunities along the ocean front and other hazard areas to restore the protection of beaches and dunes and wetlands. What we do now is we try to push these beaches and dunes out into areas where they can't sustain themselves. There's not enough space to build a protective dune. If we can selectively pull back and create those zones where these dunes can become more sustainable, and we don't have to continue necessarily to nourish every inch of the shoreline, we'll be much more successful. An example of where I would hope this is considered, and I was out in Ortley Beach yesterday with a FEMA disaster mitigation team. The boardwalk got destroyed, the ocean road in the south end of Ortley Beach got destroyed, and we sat there and we thought, boy, if they vacate this road and pull the boardwalk back, and they'll gain about 50 or 60 feet of area within which they could develop a substantial dune to protect all these homes that are there and will be rebuilt. So again, the relocation isn't wholesale move off the islands, but selective relocation can work. And the TDR principle of trading land, finding a way to transfer development credits from a hazard area to another place in a community that's less hazardous. And Frank Banish and I spoke this week. Frank did some work, it was in the mid-'80s on Strathmere and Whale Beach, and characterized how this could be done and looked at the real estate values. And at the time, the criticism was, well, it's too expensive to try to buy these homes out if we couldn't transfer the rights. The cost at that time was $2.5 million to buy out a bunch of houses and move them. So, you know, $2.5 million today might get you half a house in Long Beach Island. We heard about higher standards. I'll go through this one quickly, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting these implemented, and don't wait for necessarily the state to go through rulemaking to do it. Communities are looking at this now. I saw the borough of Rumson introduced an ordinance to amend their flood damage ordinance to include freeboard. Whatever that advisory elevation is that's released by FEMA, that will tell you this is the new flood elevation, and to go at least 2 feet above that will ensure that you're going to be more protected into the future. Different standards for construction in these V zones or these coastal A zones, which are just landward of the V zones, to go to pile foundations. They're called open foundations. Piles are columns. It allows for the waves to literally run under the house without sweeping the house off the foundation. And a lot of the damage that we've seen over the past weeks to homes along the ocean front was caused by the oceanfront substandard house getting swept off the foundation and crashing into the houses down the street. So those houses otherwise may have been saved and wouldn't have been completely destroyed had those coastal A zone homes been built to a different standard with an open foundation. So these are things that we know we can do. It's simple, it's cost effective, and again, I think collectively, if we can encourage that to happen, particularly through municipal zoning and planning, and hopefully through state regulation, we'll be a lot better off. In terms of regulations, Executive Order 2, obviously no one in this room can rescind the governor's executive order, but I would certainly advocate that an Executive Order 2 that doesn't allow state agencies to adopt standards that exceed the federal minimums is not really in the best long-term interest of the state and the communities. And I think certainly Governor Christie, to his credit, has been out on the ground. He's seen what's happened. I think it's important as the leader of the state that he's not watching it from Trenton. He's out there, he's getting a view of the damage, and hopefully he'll get a different sense of how important it is in terms of the standards issue. There are a lot of things we could do in terms of increasing the restrictions on how and where we build next to beaches and dunes and wetlands. Those should be considered. Land use management, we talked about development setbacks. That can be natural resource restoration areas, conservation zoning, looking at possibly restricting rebuilding of every structure that's been storm damaged in certain areas that we know will remain vulnerable because they continually erode and are subject to significant hazards. On the natural resource end, we shouldn't be asking the question of should we build dunes everywhere. We've had a lot of success in this state with dune building. It should be required in every community, period. We should look at conditioning aid. I know there was some discussion about strings and chains being attached, but it's the strongest way to get to compel actions is to say, we'll give you money to repair that boardwalk. We'll give you that $20 million. But in order to get that money, you have to take some steps to mitigate future damages to that boardwalk. And dune building is tried and true. We know how to do it. It should be a standard. We should be looking at dune volumes that are based on a very good standard in the DEP's coastal zone management rule, based on a volume, not on a dune height, an arbitrary height or a width. It's a volume thing. We should end the debate about lowering dunes, and that used to drive me nuts when I was at DEP to hear where towns were worried about the views. I think we may have gotten past it. I heard a great comment, and I wish I knew the woman's name who made it a few weeks ago. It's not my comment, but it was great. She said, if you can see the ocean can see you too. I thought, yeah, that's good. The increased buffers against wetlands. The other thing is, this last one is something I found myself struggling with as a regulator in DEP. We don't have a lot of room to reestablish wetlands because we bulkheaded so much of our bay shorelines. And there's always been a biological debate among the feds and the state about, can we start filling some of these shallow areas to create wetlands? I think we have to shift that debate. When you go out and you look at these bulkheaded shorelines with open bay waters that we know now are subject to these surges, trying to reestablish wetlands there, the only way it will happen is through filling in those shallow waters and building wetlands in those areas. Important consideration. In the northern and the more densely developed urban areas, you have a lot less options. It's much more difficult when you have row homes, packed block after block. So we have to really focus on flood-proofing and retrofitting homes in those areas, elevate where possible. Stormwater management is a major problem in these communities. Much of the flooding comes back through the storm systems. Residences, and I know my sister's home in Hoboken, she's got a little storm drain in the well that goes down to the first floor, which is below grade. And the storm water came up through this pipe and went right into her door in the basement, and that's where 2 feet of water met that home. And this happens all over these communities. So there are engineering solutions in these areas that we should apply. Elevating utilities, obviously a no-brainer, and water-resistant building materials. Two more things before I get to the conclusion. Legislation is important. Obviously, we have a very strong CAFRA statute right now. It was enacted in '73. It had giant loopholes in it, and it took 20 years to close those loopholes. And in '93, the amendments to CAFRA were enacted. And I'd like to highlight it was a very bipartisan effort to get that done. Something you don't see or hear much of in today, bipartisanship in the legislature. Senator Carrillos and Senator Bennett sponsored it in the Senate. Assemblywoman Ogden, an environmental champion, with Steve Corradimos and Tom Smith in the Assembly, sponsored this bill, and Governor Florio, sitting in the front row, signed this law. It was a major change, it was a major improvement, but the 20-year cycle is now up again. So maybe we take another look at that. What are the things we can do to refine the statute to deal with the problems that we may have missed through the earlier amendments? Looking at right to rebuild, prohibition of storm damaged property in areas will be damaged again. Linking acquisition and prohibitions to Blue Acres funding is critical. We have to ensure that we can compensate property owners who may lose their development rights by virtue of a regulation or a program that's intended to further the good of the community. And we have a robust program in New Jersey, Green Acres, Blue Acres. We need more money to make it function better. But any discussion of this prohibition has to include a discussion of a compensation mechanism as well. There's talk about maybe regional planning could be improved, perhaps through some kind of a coastal commission that would be a little bit more insulated from the chains of the agency regulations and politics, and perhaps that's a thought. We remember back to the Dune and Shorefront Protection Act. It went nowhere, and in fact, the legislator who sponsored it, I think, got run out of town, Hollenbach from Bergen County. But this was a visionary proposal back in the early 1980s to look at not rebuilding severely storm damaged areas and allowing those to be converted to protective systems. I think he certainly saw things then that maybe we didn't appreciate. So again, I'll finish with a little bit of bad news and a little bit of good news. The fact is we continue to see losses that exceed from decade to decade. Flood losses increase. We do a lot of good things, and I think what this tells us is despite all the good things we're doing, we probably are not doing enough. We tend to continue with the same kinds of policies without major changes. We kind of nibble around the edges, but we don't take the real bold actions that we need to. And I think with Sandy and what we heard about potential for future storms, it's really, we can't afford to continue as a business as usual. Now the good news is there are a lot of smart people in this state, in this country who have shown what can work. We have a broad range of solutions that have worked in New Jersey and can work in the future. And we have a very brief window to really push right now because this storm, like all storms, provides a little bit of energy and discussion, but unfortunately the energy fades. By the time summer comes, things will look a little different. I was doing some beach surveying work the past few weeks. The beaches are recovering magnificently without the benefit of anybody. Mother Nature is bringing that sand back on the beaches. If you go down to these communities and walk the beach, you'll see huge sandbars that are migrating back onto the beach. But by summertime, folks may be a little less concerned about the storm. We can't let this opportunity pass. So the big question, and actually it's now $37 billion as of this week, that's the ask that the governor has made to the federal government for assistance for Sandy. And the question is, can our leaders take the bold actions, and it takes some courage to do it. Governors have done it before, and I think this governor certainly is a courageous governor. He has the ability to do it. Can we make those decisions and take those actions now that will ensure more resilient communities? I mean, we saw Governor Christie embrace the president, and he was embracing the victims, which I said was really important because to see it firsthand is certainly tells a different story. The question is, will he embrace the opportunity to make these decisions and implement actions that will help us to more sustainable and resilient communities? And we certainly hope that he does. And with the help of the people in this room, the future may be optimistic. Let's hope so. So with that, thanks very much. And Peter?
Thank you very much. You got it. Nice. Well, thank you very much, Mark. I mean, you just heard an incredible presentation that laid out the context of what we're going to be dealing with and a series of prescriptions for how we can go forward. Next up, we're going to hear from Brian O'Looney, who will talk about some of the design and building considerations we need to think about as we plan and rebuild. Brian is a design architect, master planner, and partner at Torty Gallis & Partners, a national known and recognized architecture and planning firm based in Maryland. Torty Gallis has undertaken numerous efforts nationally in resilient design in the wake of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, including the rebuilding of Desire in the New Orleans 9th Ward, master planning the rebirth of Gautier, Mississippi, the housing for military families at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, and riverfront planning right here in both Harrison and Camden, New Jersey. Brian.
So I'll be doing laser. Hello, everyone. Two things that I'd like to talk a little bit about that maybe you need to know about our firm is one thing is that we work across the spectrum of what gets built by the private sector in our communities, particularly in relation to residential. And the reason I put this slide up was to talk about where the costs might go. There's a lot of fear of construction costs going up with the new standards that you're expecting to undertake. And I hope to, with this slide, belay a little or minimize a little of those concerns because well, let me see if I can get my laser pointer to work. Where you're going to end up is probably in here. You're not going to be here. And the good thing about the communities is these are value-driven communities that have been hurt. These are places people want to be. So they're going to be willing to spend, in some cases, up to here to live in these places. But in actuality, all you're really going to need to do is build to this level. This is what we call a the podium building. They get built a lot with retail on the ground floor with concrete and then wood above. And in the end, a lot of the rebuilding that'll happen will take on that form in the communities you're going to be looking at. So, sure. Oh, there you go. Another thing about our firm that I should mention is that we work both with the public sector as master planners and with private developers that then fill these master plans. And so we have a very inextricable perspective on how the communities influence the places we work. So while the upper images in this slide are all Hope 6 projects, they're very strongly informed by the communities in which they inhabit and what is valued in those communities. The image from Cincinnati is of a Queen Anne style neighborhood that represents and evokes the character of that community. Tacoma, Washington has stronger colors and represents its character. Columbia, South Carolina has spindled columns, all relatively the same kind of housing. And one of the tasks that faces you all today is what character, how do we re-emphasize, how do we work forward and bring forth the best of what exists in these communities? How do we continue and emphasize what's lovely in Cape May, bring and augment what the sort of neglected treasures of architecture you have in Asbury Park, and add to that and make communities stronger and more whole. And this doesn't necessarily mean you have to be traditionalist. I have our example of our neighborhood in Bridgeton, where there's the new house in the foreground and one of the existing neglected houses of a lovely Victorian character that hopefully will be revitalized someday soon. But one can also look forward, as they did in Harrison. This is a project we master planned and conceptualized, and then the great local architects Minnow and Wasco carried forth. And one of the big challenges is that a lot of the standards you will likely take on will lead to solutions such as the one you see here, where houses will be placed on stilts, and if not done well, you'll expose storage to the street and devalue your public realm. So what we try to look for is ways of adding value to your community and to your neighborhoods. We have a variety of ways of doing this. We can raise grade out of the floodplain. We can move soil in ways that bring the buildings out so that if a wave comes through, there will be minimal damage. These are two communities that have done that, one in Turkey and another in Belmont Bay, Virginia, where you could see the riprap at the shoreline, and the neighborhood is raised up from there. Another option is raising the perceived ground out of the floodplain, and historically this has been done a lot. Chicago is obviously, we all know, I think know the story that that it's raised out of the ground. Atlanta was raised up at one point. There's this development called Underground Atlanta that exposes the old storefronts, and Cincinnati is going through a huge redevelopment now towards the waterfront from where the city is, where they're actually building 2 levels of parking, and the entire city will sit above this huge podium, and that is partly to help manage the floods there. This is a project that we worked on with Marianne Cruzado in the aftermath of Katrina and Rita in Mississippi and Gaucher, where this is sort of a fishing village notion where there are these boardwalks built up that connect the houses at the higher level, so that, again, that's another way of mitigating the stilt issue. But the community is connected up high. Another solutions you can also rely on can be external to the neighborhood. This is the Desire neighborhood that we were working on and opened 1 week before Katrina. So the image in the middle, the image on the left is this is a grand opening 1 week before Katrina. That's the houses. That's what it looked like for 52 days. And then they built these floodgates along the 17th Street Canal as the solution to the issues and challenges that New Orleans faced, as you heard earlier. And then because of that, because the solutions were external to the development, external to all the development that's happening in New Orleans, we went back and simply built the same houses again. Or we can actually choose to build or rebuild in the areas at risk, and these are some houses that are raised up out of the ground. And I'm going to be talking about this project for the majority of the rest of the presentation, because I think it's apropos to a lot of the issues we'll be facing in New Jersey. This is at the MacDill Air Force Base. This is military family housing. A quick primer on military family housing. We've done a number of communities across the country. For many years, as John Torty and my firm likes to say, the U.S. government was the largest slumlord. The housing was decrepit. People who really loved their jobs, serving our country, would come home, meet their spouse, and they would say to them, how can we get out of here? And so what the government did in response is start the privatization program, where private developers were welcomed in to team with the military to build new neighborhoods for our fighting forces. This one is actually been in the news recently for I'd say the wrong reasons. This is where General Petraeus and General Allen live, and we'll show you some of their houses in a second, or used to live. Yeah. One thing you'll see in the image, we talk about how important it is to have berms and at the foreground, and in this case, that also served to act as a defensive posture for the generals who'd be living right beyond those places. The earlier neighborhood that was replaced was of barracks that were right in the floodplain and dangerous. Basically, people were living in the floodplain on that lower level. Should an event happened, there was a risk of great loss of life. So this neighborhood got demolished and replaced with the neighborhood on the right. Some of the design factors that you can see here are the key setbacks along the water, berming along the water. This is facing the Tampa Bay, by the way. This is not directly out to the ocean, but the ocean is really only far down here. This is a point that comes out into Tampa Bay. I'm sorry, the Gulf is right here. This again is a view of the neighborhood. You can see the berming along the water edge there, and this is the view the other way of the water. Here's the berm that was built, the first rounds of houses. And then there's a second berm actually built into the face of that first row of houses here as part of a protective measure for the homes behind them. Again, we weren't trying to take a survivalist approach to this. We were trying to do best practices to create a great neighborhood here. If we, you could create a fort and a fortress, and it's very, it's easy to fall into that trap working with military folk. So part of what we really stressed in the design of this was to work for the families and make community for those folks serving our country. This is an important diagram, and I hope you can read it. The plan on the upper right-hand corner is the pay grades for the different officers, and obviously the best houses are in the middle on the water, and then the feathers off from 4-star generals to 3-star generals, and onward. But the house types were different, and they all had very different solutions. One thing we have to do with military housing is provide accessible housing. You'll see on the edge here, there's accessible house. And that has to be a grade, because it has to be, you have to access the houses. So what we did for those, and those were placed up here where there was higher ground, is put them on the higher ground where they can get easy access and work that way. Other houses, particularly for the high generals, higher grade generals, were built on plinths out of the BFE. Those red lines represent the BFE. So the base flood elevation, one of the things you're going to have to do once we get the A BFEs is figure out how you're going to design to them, whether it's 4 feet or 8 or 9 feet above the existing grade that you're living with, and that could be a particular challenge. So from a design standpoint, your community may choose to fight back and say, gee, this really will be hard to make great neighborhoods out of, and you'll have to talk about that and what it means for you when you get when you get the understanding of where the ABFE is and how it would impact how your communities work. Another type we built are the pier and the open foundation types, which we'll talk about also in a second. And for those, what we realized is the BFE was roughly 4 feet out of ground, 4 to 5 feet in this neighborhood. And we chose to raise those up so that the space under the house could be used for parking. And that achieved a lot of things for us that we'll talk about in a second. So these are the raised plinth solutions. These we raise the houses up. These are for the top generals. These are one of the most expensive housing solutions you can take on. These raise the finished floor of the houses above where the BFE was by, I believe, a foot or so. These are one tier down. This was General Allen's house here. This incorporates the smart vents that Tim had mentioned earlier. You can see one actually working right there where the water's pouring through. And what that helps do is equalize the water pressure on the foundation. We also try to make the foundations, actually let me go back one. What we try to do is make the face of these buildings facing the roadways more solid and create a pleasant front to the streets. On the backs, in the case of this house, they became louvered for the garage. In the case of the open foundation houses, the lattice that we had actually opened up to just pure open design into the alleyways. And these are alley-loaded homes on the back, although the ones on the water have driveways that are, the big houses have a driveway court that comes in. There's the garage there. The next level down had a shared driveway that then accessed two garages, again, to try to establish a nice street wall and street edge with these houses. These are, again, houses that are served by a shared driveway facing the water. They have the breakaway walls, which the folks who provide insurance will tell you will cost your insurance a little bit more than the lattice, breakaway lattice will in the end, but it helps provide a nicer frontage. Again, the landscaping hasn't grown up, but eventually the landscaping here will grow taller, and the houses will sit high in the frontage. These are the homes that were built with open foundations. This neighborhood, I should have mentioned this earlier, is in a V zone. This is where there's a velocity zone where water will come in. And again, for a variety of reasons, partly to provide additional parking, also to provide more room for wave action, we raised this up about 4 feet more than we were asked to by the required BFE. You can see some of the other items that we put into the home design here, which I will talk about in a little bit. This slide shows the base construction through its entire process of construction. So if you look over here, you'll see a foundation, the actual piers in the ground, and how they're buried down so that we don't have scouring and so they don't get undermined if wave action comes in. The next steps, you see the actual frame, and these are reinforced masonry piers coming up that then are tied together with bond beams, which you can see in these images, upon which a wood deck is placed with trusses, with regular wood trusses. So this is an inexpensive way to build these relatively. We're not trying to pour a whole concrete slab on that level there. And then finally, a house pre-roof and then a house roofed. So you can see the whole process in this one slide of how these homes are built. This is the base plate detail for the homes, and from the base plate up, obviously this project followed the Miami-Dade design standards, which you all, I'm hoping, will, if not are already familiar with, will become familiar with, and where the trusses are tied down to the foundation. You can see some of the trusses there arriving on the site. Obviously, I like to show naked photos of the buildings before they get finished. This is the same view in construction and after. Here are some of the breakaway lattice details. Here are some of the strapping details on the left, and it's hard to see, but you can actually see the strapping here to each of the trusses. Every single truss has metal strapping that ties it down to that wall. Each of these walls have rods that come through and tie them down to the base plate. Actually, that's the upper floor that goes through that floor down to the base plate of the foundation. A good best practice is at the corners and edges to provide hipped roofs. They better resist the wind, but a whole neighborhood of hipped roofs can be kind of rough, unfortunate. So we elected to allow for non-hip roof solutions mid-block in this particular area. The first habitable level, it requires two means of egress. One needs to be secure, the other was designed as sacrificial. So we chose to make the one at the front concrete, and the one at the rear was wood and sacrificial, as you can see in the image on the right. Again, we raised the floor 5 feet over BFE, and we had a big debate with, and went all the way up to the top generals actually, about where we should place the condensers. A number of members of our team wanted to mount it on cantilevers here so that it was up and it also was less at risk from a catastrophic event, but the officers and some other folks decided they wanted it down lower, just above BFE, because that minimized sound and didn't impact views as much. So that's why they are where they are. So if you look at where that condenser sits, that is the BFE elevation in relation to this house. One thing that tuck-under parking achieves for us, and this is a huge potential for people who are rebuilding communities, is it allows us to minimize lot size. When we were building these tuck-under houses, you don't need as deep a lot, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but since you saw that image, here we go. There's two plans on the left. The first one is a conventional townhouse. The second one is a tuck-under townhouse. If you tuck under, you are able to use a lot smaller lot sizes. So for communities that are thinking about having to, not wanting to lose their community density and maybe having to take some land out of commission through a variety of means, and I thought the notion of the soft second mortgage is one way of getting people to move to another place. It is a possibility that if you allow for the subdivision of lots in your community, you might be able to achieve a greater density and also hide the parking. I mean, one of the biggest nasty externalities that limits the quality of our communities is exposed parking. So these solutions can help you minimize how the parking is impacting our walkable environments, our frontages on our homes. One other thing that it does that's a big challenge for us all is that what makes the frontage more active is a little bit of a mudroom on the ground floor. If there was a way to do that, it would be a way of helping our communities, but some communities will decide that that is habitable space and you can't do that. Others may choose to say, no, a mudroom should belong there, or a little space that is not a bedroom may be okay on the ground floor to help activate our street frontages. This will be a big debate that I'm sure a lot of us will have as we move forward. So if you look closely, I'll show this image again because you can see the block. This block is about half the width that a block that'd be conventionally loaded with a garage behind it would have been. And it allows less space than conventional lots, greater parking efficiency, and if you choose to move people out of certain places that are at higher risk because they're lower, which could be renaturalized, other parts of the community can be densified to help take on the community character, so you're not fully losing the community. And that was something that happened to us in Desire, actually, in New Orleans. Our neighborhood was insured, it was under construction, so it got rebuilt rather quickly. But the unfortunate thing, as was alluded to earlier, was the 9th Ward had 40% of the people missing. And the biggest change that happened after Katrina was there had to be a big wall and fence put around Desire for security and safety, and there was a gate going in and out of the neighborhood where the original design for the community was one that was integrated into the 9th Ward and part of the community. So one of the challenges you will have is to ensure that your communities are active and alive and vibrant and not having a lot of missing gap teeth, as was as mentioned earlier. And this is one way of doing that. And one other thing, this is not in a flood zone, but it's a project that's apropos to some of the challenges we can face. Smaller retail spaces in certain jurisdictions are allowed to go into floodplains, and that can help, but certainly large format users are not. But again, here's a project we did where it's a 65,000 square foot supermarket on a 2nd floor with its own generator, and a little bit of retail on the street frontage to activate the street. So what this does is this can be a huge community resource after a big event because it can stay open, have the food you need, have prepared foods. And the other thing it does is it only takes half the land. This is effectively a strip center. It's got the retail on the ground floor here. All the parking is underneath. A little bit of parking in back, but it provides the same function, the same uses that a conventional strip center does on half the land or even a third of the land. So some of the challenges with this is that communities would have to allow loading in the wetlands, so that this little space back here is the loading dock for the store. So if you allow that habitable use in the floodplain, you can suddenly create a resource that really is available to you. You're not going to be using the loading dock in the middle of the flood event. But after that flood event, this will be a resource potentially available to your community. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I think some of those images certainly should have gotten us all thinking a little bit creatively about some of the possibilities as we rethink rebuilding our shore. I have one announcement to make. There are a number of people who are here who are not from the area, and there was a request made that they'd like to get a group together to go and do an informal tour of the beach area, of a couple of the beaches. So Ann Jacobson was kind enough to put it together with a local guide. So if you're interested in a little driving tour, you can meet back in the lobby at 1 o'clock.
All yours, Peter.
How about a great hand for our panelists? That was just terrific. What a great way to almost wrap things up. Before I bring up Patrick Murray, just a number of people have asked, and let me just confirm that the presentations will be on the New Jersey Future website in the future. Next week, njfuture.org, and also on the Urban Coast Institute at Monmouth University website, monmouth.edu/urban_coast_institute. Patrick Murray, the director of the Polling Institute at Monmouth University. Now you've had the surveys on your chairs, and he will tell you what's going to happen with this as well as additional work he's doing. Patrick?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all. If you don't have one on your chair, there's more by the box back there at the registration table. So if you could fill that out and drop that off in the box on your way out, thanks. To give you a sense of where those questions are coming from, next week we will be releasing at the Monmouth University Polling Institute a survey that we did of New Jersey residents using these exact same questions. Now, you heard from Gene Herb that Rutgers will be doing a survey that's going to be much more in-depth in terms of climate issues. And these are just a broad brush stroke that we wanted to take the initial gut level reaction of the public statewide towards the rebuilding effort and the kind of assistance that the state should provide for that. So it'll be interesting to see how the folks who are here today compare to the public at large here in the state of New Jersey, and we'll be releasing that with New Jersey Future and the Real Estate Institute and the Urban Coast Institute, and you'll all get a copy of that as well sometime, maybe even as early next week on that. I just want to give you a sense of this is just the first step of the things that we're doing here at the Monmouth University Polling Institute in conjunction with a lot of other partners, is to try to use our resources to better understand what the individual level impact is of this storm. Some of the things that we can already point out are some of the estimates about how many people were affected by power outages. I think you saw that Megan Lincoln put up an estimate that was based on what the utility companies were reporting as their customer outages, and it said 80% of the public was affected by this. It was actually smaller than that. It was actually 2/3 of the public were without power at some point after the storm. The reason being is that 12% of the public lost their power during Sandy, got it back, and then a week later they lost it again when the winter storm hit. So they got counted twice by the utility companies. So what we're trying to do with our estimates and finding out how much damage there was at the individual level all across the state as well as in the hardest hit areas is to figure out these numbers as well. We also intend to do more in-depth polling and survey research work with people in the hardest hit areas, people who are long-term displaced, homeowners and renters, as well as business owners, and track them over the next year to find out what their needs are and what kind of needs persist with them. One of the things that we know in terms of the public policy implications are that what the folks on the ground want affects what the political leaders are willing to do. And as we know from the devastation, those that homeowners who had agreed in some way, shape, or form to have sand dunes in front of their property on the beachfront were better off than those who didn't. But there's political reasons why. And Charlie Chestnut mentioned that this is not just a New Jersey issue. This is a Mid-Atlantic issue. What happens in one part of the Mid-Atlantic happens in another. And by the same token, what the people who live in coastal communities in one part of the Mid-Atlantic and want and get from their political leaders affects what happens all the way down the coast. So if Long Island residents don't perceive position X as a priority, but it is for those who live in Delaware and Maryland, and there's no coordination there because of the political disparities, then that can have a major impact. And in fact, the Urban Coast Institute and the Polling Institute have done a series of surveys specifically of residents who live in coastal communities in the Mid-Atlantic, from Long Island all the way down to Virginia. We did one in 2007, another one in 2009, which provide a wealth of information and insight into these different priorities that public policy makers need to understand if we're going to move forward in a concerted and coordinated way. And these are things that we're going to be looking forward to doing more of and contributing more of in the future. So fill out those surveys, and we're on our first step to better understanding the impact of Sandy. Thank you very much.
So thank you all for staying. And we're probably 50% of the people are still here, and that's a testament to your resilience and your fortitude. And we look forward to continuing to educate everyone on the best way to have a resilient shore. Thank you.